Welcome back to the Aviation RC Noob Podcast. You found us. My name is Joe.
And I'm Matt.
We're here to be with you along your journey and to share our experiences in RC aviation. If you have any questions, thoughts, or want to share a flight story, hit us up at aviationrcnoob@gmail.com. Now, buckle in. Let's take off. And we're back. Welcome back, everybody, to episode 25. Today we've got a very special treat. Matthew had reached out to a gentleman by the name of Robert Red Jensen a while back, and he has agreed to join us on the show. So, Robert, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. My pleasure.
Welcome, Red.
And
Thank you.
Red is a Class 1 and 2 SUAS Chief Pilot, Master UAS Technician, and the Model Lab Operations Engineer at Dale Reed Subscale Research Lab at NASA's Neil A. Armstrong Flight Research Center. That is a title, my friend.
Yeah, you're going to need a glass of water after that.
Did I do okay with it?
You did great.
Thanks. Yeah, so we're going to be talking to Red about what's going on in his world and what he does. Here in just a little bit. At first, we're going to talk about our flight stories and all. Just a second. All of a sudden, the nerves hit me, Red.
What? Oh, man.
Dude, it's just me.
It didn't.
Cool.
He's reading his at the Neil Armstrong Flight Research Center.
See, I told you, lab guy. Just call me lab guy.
No, it's fine. It's just all of a sudden it's like, oh crap, we're doing this.
Yeah, we're doing it. It's awesome. So excited.
Yeah. So
yeah, we're gonna talk. We're gonna talk to Red here about his experiences in the hobby for him and kind of what brought him around to working for NASA. And along his journey, I think we'll talk about it, about how he managed to fall into owning a hobby store for a little while. And then, of course, we're going to talk, as everybody who gets excited about this kind of stuff when you're young with NASA, you're like, I want to work for NASA. And hopefully he can kind of help some of the younger pilots and younger hobby enthusiasts about how they might be able to use the hobby to help them reach some of their goals and dreams in aviation and aeronautical engineering and that kind of thing. As well as I want to pick his brain about STEM. Joe, you and I both, you've heard me talk ad nauseum and heard me every year talk about my Cub experience, about how I basically helped the kids build a chuck glider in the gym out of foam board and have them toss it all the way across, and like all of them are just, you'd see their eyes light up like, whoa, holy cow. Mm-hmm. And it's really transformative. So I'm eager to hear.
Flight is magic.
Was that?
I said flight is magic. It's just magic. It's something you can't really wrap your head around, and it grabs people such as myself in some ways that it makes a huge impact. So you never know when you're going to touch the right kid. Right. With aviation, right?
Inspire. I use the
inspire,
term.
Yeah.
But you never know when you're going to light the spark or inspire that kid who never knew that this was even a thing. And then you just showed them that this is possible. And not only that, but they could be part of it and reasonably. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, you just changed the world, which, it's not everybody, but one out of every maybe like 20 or 30 kids. And man, it's magical. And magical on our end, and it's magical for them. It's really awesome. And I know Red has. I heard a little bit of this and that about how he's getting involved or has been involved with the Reno Air Races, and I want to pick his brain a little bit about that, because one of the things when we look like, okay, we're in this hobby, we're building these model airplanes, it's awesome, but for some of us, it's like this is still just a stepping stone, or at least it's a good resting spot. Well, we go, oh man, I want to go full scale. I want to see what I can do with this, And so I want to kind of pick his brain as to how he got involved with that and what that entails, and if you're interested in something like this, how might you go about kind of getting involved? So
Yeah, that's a good story. Yeah, we can jump in wherever you like, and I can talk all night. So you
Okay,
tell me what you
well,
want to talk about.
all right, well, get your water and some rations because we may be here a while. No, no. Well, before we get too far into it, but that's what I want to talk to Red about. Obviously, we're going to meander. I don't think we know how to do anything other than meander around the topics we talked about just now. But before we do, why don't we talk about our fly stories as we always do in each episode and share our experiences in the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
Joe, do you want to start, or Red, do you want to be our guest and kicking that off? I'm sure you've done something this week.
Well, yeah. So I try to fly whenever possible. I keep a couple of foamies around to fly. Unfortunately, my work schedule has been really crazy. I've worked the last 11 days straight. So today was the first day I didn't actually have to go on center, and we were hosting a program. The National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Association was doing some testing.
Mm-hmm.
So we were supporting them. They're doing high altitude weather research with a UAS. Made it to
Oh, nice.
75,000 feet yesterday, as a matter of fact, which is pretty cool. But
so hold on, we'll pause there. So this is NOAA, right? These are So as a civil engineer, I go to the NOAA website to figure out what kind of actual precipitation has occurred and what kind of storm events am I likely to see and what probabilities. That's what they do. So at least in part, that's like a small part of what they do. But that's where I get my core data because that's like the best place to get it. However, so this is how they collect the raw data. What are they doing? Are they grabbing like a UAV, or they're grabbing a drone or something?
Well, so this is a developmental project. So what they're currently doing is they launch these things called IMET. So they launch a lot of different instrumentations, but packages. But the IMET is kind of an all-in-one, atmospheric thing, and they launch it on a weather balloon. And the weather balloons are small enough that they are waived by the FAA. They don't need a special clearance to fly. So I want to say that under 12 pounds total, you can launch anywhere, and it's just kind of a see and avoid thing for general aviation, right? And they pass through the general aviation airspace pretty quick, and they go very high, like 100,000 feet or something like that. And most civil aviation stops in the mid 30s or so. Military goes a little higher than that, but once you're past it, it's really not a problem. And they just go up and they burst, and then this IMET thing falls, and it's disposable essentially. So what they're trying to do is develop a UAV that will ascend on a balloon.
What does UAV stand for our listeners? And
great question. Unmanned aerial vehicle.
Okay. And what does that include?
So that is typically just the aircraft, whatever that might be. The term UAS, or unmanned aerial system, usually refers to the vehicle plus whatever support equipment you need to fly it, the ground station, the radio links, all that kind of stuff. So UAV is typically an airplane. UAS is typically a system that includes an airplane or multiple airplanes and whatever else it takes to go.
Okay. I'm sorry. Okay. So they dropped the UAV.
Yeah. So the reason they're doing a UAV is because they want there are instrumentation packages now that are capable of getting much better data, much higher fidelity data, and measure things that they can't normally measure, but they're very expensive. So you don't want to send it up on a weather balloon and lose it, right? It'd be much better if you could get it back. Well, the easiest way to get it back is to put it in an airplane and fly it back. So they're developing a high altitude deployable aircraft from a weather balloon that can still, get all the data they would normally get, plus a whole bunch more, and then fly it back and use it again. So they can afford to put higher cost instrumentation on board to get higher quality data, and not think that, well, this is disposable and that's all we're going to get. So part of the challenge,
not a lost cost of the project. It's really nice. Okay, got it.
Yeah. So you think, well, maybe a UAV is expensive, but if you save 10, 20, or 100 of these packages and bring it back, well, then the cost really doesn't seem to be that much. So in order to fly these things, so we're talking about a 25-pound airplane and associated balloon, which is outside the FAA's exemption. So they need to come to restricted airspace to fly that. So they're flying it at Edwards Air Force Base, where I work. And we started out low. We went to like 5,000 feet, and then 10,000, then 25,000, and then 45,000, and then finally to 75,000. And it was a challenge because spring in the Southern California Antelope Valley where I live is very, very windy. It's not uncommon to have an excess of 40 miles an hour wind at the surface. So
Okay.
did a little bit of that. I flew my foamy. I just built a new high-tech Challenger biplane foamy. It's like a 3D foamy thing.
Okay.
Sold by a bunch of places. And that's really all the flying that I've done in the past 10 days. Prior to that, I took a few days off, and I went to a pylon racing competition, and I went to a slope soaring fun fly event, which was awesome.
Okay.
I enjoyed both of those.
Okay, so I'm gonna, if you don't mind me pausing here, I'm not pausing, but I want to know more about those things, because those are also, to me, is it like full scale pylon racing, or is it hobby?
No, all models. Yeah. The
Okay,
full scale
all models.
pylon thing only currently happens once a year, although there is 2 races this year, which is exciting. One in September and then another one again in October.
Is that kind of to make up for lost time from last year?
No, one of them is just the event that goes every year at Reno, and there's a new circuit specifically targeting Formula One, which is the class that I'm trying to participate in. They're trying to get a circuit going, so this is one of these outlier races that potentially could be on a circuit.
Okay, cool.
Very cool.
What about the slope soaring competition? Are you talking about is that the slope soaring competitions where they've got to land it on a dime kind of deal from, have it up there for an hour and a half and then land it on a dime?
No, that's
at
called,
a very specific time.
Yeah, there are a lot of thermal duration competitions that do that, but this particular one wasn't a competition. It was just a fun fly, a camp in. So everybody goes to a place called Sunset State Beach, and people camp there, and you basically fly for 3 days and hang out with your RC buddies, and it was an awesome time. I really enjoyed it.
You know what I found? I did not expect that slope soaring, or not slope soaring, but just soaring in general, gliding would be something for me. I guess I always thought for some reason, like, I'm going to be digging the 500 mile an hour speed passes and quick turns and, acrobatics and whatever.
Well, that's all kind cool. I enjoy that too. But if I'm perfectly honest, I learned more about piloting technique and skill, and I learned more about design and aerodynamics from sailplanes than anything else by far.
Interesting. Yeah. And I'll tell you what, I learned about how to read the air better and understand what's happening to the plane and to the surrounding air by just sitting down with a guy who, he's like, hey, you see what your plane just did? This is what's happening. It was absolutely awesome. Just really awesome. It's cool. So nice. So,
I equate it. You don't have a motor to bail you out, right? So you have to fly the airplane. If you have, a typical airplane that's overpowered, if you want to go up, you just pull back on the elevator and hammer the throttle, and it goes up, right? Yeah. In a sailplane, you don't have that luxury. You always have to fly. You don't always have to, but in order to get the most out of it, you have to fly the airplane as efficiently as possible. So, those piloting techniques go a long, long way. Both thermal duration and, slope soaring and even pylon racing gliders too. So it's a fantastic segment of the hobby that's fascinating to me still to this day.
Yeah. What do you make of, and we don't, if you'd like to add it to something at the end, we can do that. But when you talk about slope soaring, I also think about the dynamic soaring.
Yes.
They've been making like mad breakthroughs in speed runs on this dynamic soaring by using the backside of a hill trough as like kind of the return, the no energy loss return, so that when they come around the top side of the hill and get like zipped around that top turn, they keep gaining energy. And that's incredible. Like,
it's amazing. And I live in the Mecca for de-essing. And, I came from Northern California. I'm in Southern California now, but, when I started, I jumped on the DS bandwagon pretty early when there were no purpose-built airplanes. You're just kind of flying whatever. And the holy grail back then was 200. You know,
Right.
200 miles an hour was a big deal. I did about
Yeah.
170 or so before my plane, wasn't happy at all, and it didn't come apart, but it just wouldn't fly well. It was flexing so bad. But
Yeah.
I knew the guy. The first guy that went 200 miles an hour, Craig Tutalman, and the biggest increase in speeds, I believe, has come in the form of technology, in the way of building aircraft stronger, understanding how that works, better servos, strong linkages, things like that. The world record now, I think, is 545 or 547.
Yeah.
Set 20 minutes from my house, by the way. DS is absolutely incredible stuff.
I mean, geez.
And the skill needed to pilot those planes at those speeds, because I watched a video where they were doing that, and just how fast that thing is whipping and hauling. And there's no, I'm bad for dumb thumbing. There's no dumb thumb option with that.
No, it's not a penalty-free section of the hobby, that's for sure. But I will say that, doing it in person, I'm not going to say it's easier, but the videos make it look like it's very difficult to follow, and it's really not, because the cameras just have a hard time keeping up with the vehicles. When you're there and you get to use your entirety of your peripheral vision and everything, it's not terrible. And you don't have to go 500 miles an hour. I mean, you can go 100. First time I went 100, I'm like, holy crap, this thing is moving. And so it's just all relative. It's much easier to see it in person and understand what's going on in person than it is from any video.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. All right. Well, Matthew, do we want to go ahead and do our fly stories, and then we can dive into everything else we want to talk about? I'll go real quick, largely because I'm ashamed to say, but it ends up working out because we have a lot of information to discuss. I haven't had a whole lot going on as far as the hobby goes. I know I was watching some stuff and reading some stuff on Red Jensen, so that I could be a little more knowledgeable to be able to talk with him tonight. But as far as the hobby itself, not a whole lot. I know I was sitting down to work on my Corsair one night and couldn't find the wire I needed, which is a dumb thing, but I just couldn't find the wire I needed for my control rods, that kind of crap. Crudted that night out, and then I sat down again I had found a wire I could use, and I went to go cut the rudder push rod so I could change it out from the music wire to the landscaping wire. And lo and behold, in my rush to get it done, I cut my elevator control rod and not the rudder. So now I get to replace both of them before I can get it in the air.
I'm so sorry, Joe.
That's just how that goes sometimes. And in as much as we're going to have plenty that folks can learn from this episode, I'm sure I like when I can say, here's a takeaway from this story. And it's a very short story, but I grew up with the adage, and I sometimes forget it when I'm doing things other than cutting a piece of wood. But I grew up with my dad telling me, measure twice, cut once. Well, pay attention to what you're doing and double check what you're doing before you pull the trigger on it. Because as a result, I've got extra work on me because I got in a rush. I wasn't paying attention. I know what I'm doing. Clip. Oh, there goes a perfectly good push rod that didn't have to be worked on.
Mm-hmm.
So that pushes the Corsair Maiden back a little bit more. But that's just how that goes.
Yeah, maybe I'll have to come down and work on it with you. Just keep pushing it. I
just need to. You know what? We got a build night coming up this Friday. Actually.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we do.
So
you want to talk about that?
By the time, yeah, I can do it real quick. I'll use my segment for that. So by the time this episode releases, which will be Saturday morning, the build night will have already occurred. But we talked about it last time. We'll have a build night this Friday night, and then after I think probably next episode, and maybe before then, you and I'll make an announcement in Facebook and our Discord as far as, hey, we're looking to do another build night. And I think this time, the next time we plan a build night, we're going to do the Friday, but we're also going to do the Saturday because we didn't do the Saturday version this time. So our more European time zone folks can join in a little more easily for that one. But yeah, that's what I'll be doing this Friday night, is hopefully finishing up that Corsair.
Okay. And that's on the Discord server. What time? Between 8 and 11 Eastern Standard Time, or Eastern Daylight Time, I guess.
Yes. But again, by the time this one goes up, we'll have
It'll be
already
too
had
late.
it.
Too late. I hope everybody who came had a great time. I know we did.
All right, so what have you been flying this week, Matt?
Honestly, it has been the last week of school. Busy. I run the local Cub Scout group, and we have our final hurrah. So I had a Cub Scout outing last weekend. It's also the time I transfer my kids to my ex, so they get to spend the summer with her. And so I spent one weekend doing camping and driving, which was not doing anything having to do with the hobby. I did work on the J1000 and get a little bit of that done. I think I've ironed the edges so that they come together just so. I've also figured out the spar, but I have not had the time to kind of put them together in one piece. I did a little bit more work on the car plane. A lot of it was more just kind of thinking, how am I going to run the servos? Am I going to power the wheels? Am I going to steer? Use the front steering at all? And that kind of thing, and kind of thinking about those items. And I know that doesn't have any tangible end product yet, but it is critical.
It means something to you.
Yeah, it's really important to being able to move forward and being confident with, closing up the two fuselages, or I'm sorry, the two cabins. I don't know what you would call those. Getting that done. I've also pulled out, I had to clean up a bunch of stuff in the one corner, kind of packing away some old bric-a-brac or knickknacks. And while I was doing that, I had to move a bunch of planes out of the way. So I've got, the old Synergy, the one that we flew together that kind of barely skidded off the ground, but once it was up, it was a good time.
I'm trying to remember which one that was.
I'm going to show Joe and Red. It's the one down there, the little football-looking one with the box wings.
The blue and orange.
Yes. So we did that. And I think if you go on our YouTube channel or my YouTube channel, we have one. We have
it's
a video
yours.
of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that was the day that that was the day I launched the old Fogey on the CPAC full throttle and had the throttle kill on, and they just flipped it off, and it went from 0 to 20 feet up in the air in no time.
It did. You're like, how fast can we? Oh gosh, look at that.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. 0 to 100, baby. I think that thing took off at all of like half a foot.
I know. Well, that's the great part about that little the old Fogey. The old Fogey Red. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's basically the Lazy Bee, but a foam board version of it.
Yep.
So it's just a floater. It's a lot of fun. I love that plane. I really need to fix my wing and get it back in operation. And then while doing a lot of the research, I put together the old, I'll call it the original Prandlt wing, but I did a foam board version, which I got to glide across my yard really well. The powered flight didn't end up well. I ended up doing basically a high wind loop, very long loop as I tried to control it, and it didn't work. And so I had to rebuild it. There's enough damage where I felt like it would be better to rebuild it. And then I'm thinking about it. I was thinking, the ailerons on it are really thin and they're way out there. And to find a servo that's the same thickness as two foam boards isn't easy to find. So I decided what I was going to do is I was going to rebuild it with basically like a 10-inch of fatter cord, a smaller wing ratio, and basically do the twist in that wing. And it's I think it's going to be 60 inches. So it's going to be sizable when it's put together, but it's not going to be the, was 30. So it has like 120 inches, I think.
Yeah.
The bird of time.
I basically cut the foam board into 4 different sections and put them, so 30 inches times 4 is 120. Yeah. So
don't worry a whole lot about hiding your servos inside the wing. It really doesn't matter. You can let them hang out. So I would put them on top, put your linkage on top to protect it from, landing damage, and just go for it. Yeah, it'll be fine.
Okay. Well, I actually have the plans already sprayed onto a piece of foam board, ready to cut the original design back out again and rebuild, which I will definitely do. This, I was just eager to see if I could kind of get that, maybe get the twist a little bit easier, using some ironing the edges and kind of come to clamshelling it better than I did last time. And just maybe have an easier time. Anyway, so I worked on that. And then I took out the FT Duster yesterday, and I got it up to about 40 feet, and the motor started to shut off. And I think there was some sort of internal short in one of the systems. And I first took off, and I didn't put the battery far enough forward. So it was very tail heavy and really squirrely. And I'm hoping that FPV footage is solid. I didn't get a chance to check, because that's going to be a video for sure. As you see, you'll basically be the static shot of the field, and the FT Duster zip off to the left side as it kind of came back behind the flight line. I was the only person out there. And then the quick cut to the FPV footage of it doing loops and swirls and who knows, rolls and all sorts of stuff until it went into the wheat. Anyway, it'll be a very short video, about 20 seconds, I'm sure. Anyway, but it wasn't damaged, so I kind of took it out and I looked it over, and I was trying to figure out what was going on, and I moved the battery up and everything looked fine. So I put it back on the field, and I took it off, and it was all good. It was climbing. It was about 40 feet up, and then the motor shut off. It just stopped. And then so I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm dead sticking it. So I kind of, turned the rudder and brought it back down, and it was a bit of a hard landing, but it came down in one piece. So I think I don't know what's going on. I've got to figure out if it's a ESC or the motor, and I'll probably replace it. It's just an orange can, cheapo 2212 1400 kV motor. So it's a
Have you tried spinning it up while it's been on the ground?
Yes, and when it does, it goes up to speed, and then it stops and halts, and then it stutters like there's a short. Anyway,
I'd be curious to see what that one turns out to be.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm interested in going through the diagnostics for a $5 motor, but if it's ESC, that could also continue to be a problem. That's a simple fix. You run it up on a different motor that you know is good. If it's still stuttering, it's probably the ESC that's bad. So, or one of the connections. I don't know. Anyway, so I didn't do a whole lot. I really didn't do a lot of flying. I'm really disappointed too, because it has been a spectacular set of weeks in North Carolina. The weather's been between 60 and 80, typically around 70. Very light breeze and sunny and beautiful blue skies. So I don't know I know what was wrong. I mean, I had baseball, birthday parties, Cub Scout stuff, and it was a busy week. So anyway, I was happy to get out and do a little bit of flying. Definitely satiated a need that was coming up. It was getting bigger and bigger. I'm like, I need to fly something. So even though it was a small little bit of like 10 seconds of true flight with the Duster, it was fun to go, oh no, dead stick, and actually bring it in safely-ish.
We got a little practice on that anyway.
Yeah, that's for sure. I'm tired of getting practice on that. I want to have more fun practicing regular flying. So anyway, that's it.
I think you and I are going to have to plan a weekend where we can get together and we both just say we're going to have, planes that we're ready to fly, and we just have a day of flying.
That sounds like a good plan.
So I think that'll get us both motivated to be in the air, get some proper flight time. Okay. And that's the baby SR-71 you're holding up?
It is. It's ready at this point. So
that's cool.
Yeah. I think it's, I'll be bringing it out next week. I think there's something that was an issue, and I think I checked it last time, but I didn't have time to really go through it before I went out, and I knew the Duster was ready to go. So when I get a little bit of time later this week, I'll be bringing that out. Hopefully I'll be able to tell everybody about the amazing success at the end of the week while we're building. Hey, Joe, what are you going to be building at the build party, by the way? Do you know?
Again, heading back for that Corsair.
Okay.
And if I can get that all taken care of, then I need to rebuild the Fogey Power Pod.
Okay.
So I can have that to fly.
I think you should do that anyway. I think you should plan on doing that and then figure out the Corsair. That way you definitely have a fogey to fly.
Yeah, we'll see.
Okay. I've got the car plane and the J1000, the Junker 1000 that I'm going to put together, and then probably the rest of this plane I started today. So that'll keep us busy.
Well,
all right.
We ready to get into the main topic?
Yeah. Why don't we start by... I don't know how to introduce Red. I think the mouthful of an introduction of his title kind of says it all in pieces. He's an amazing pilot. He works for NASA. He works basically researching basically at the Scale Lab to improve aeronautic flight for all of us here in America. I think that's the quick sum up.
That's
Red,
the nutshell,
you got 10 seconds. Do you think you can do a better intro? I'm sure you can.
Well, I would just say that NASA has been doing flight research for, half a century or more, quite a bit actually, 75 years. And we use subscale aircraft to do flight research with. It's that simple. So my lab is a technology incubator, and typically we can do things more cheaply, faster, with less risk before it goes to the full scale or manned piloted world.
Excellent. Cool. And then I can't wait to get into talking about the details of that. So welcome to the show. Officially, welcome to, this is your segment. And Yay. So why don't we start by getting to know, as most of us here in this hobby, when we start talking to somebody, like, how did you get started? So why don't you tell us your story of how you got interested in aviation, and then how that translated into the radio control hobby. And oftentimes they're the same, but sometimes it's not.
Sure. My story is kind of funny, as I don't know how I got interested in aviation. There was never a point where I went, oh, wow, airplanes, those are cool. It was always cool. I was always around them, and it was just like a thing from the very earliest times. My dad was a pilot and into model airplanes, so I grew up in the garage, going to the flying field on the weekends, building airplanes, doing all that kind of stuff, and it was just what I did. There was never a question of hey, do you like this or do you not like that or whatever. It's just that's what I did, and I immediately gravitated towards it and had an absolutely insatiable thirst to learn everything that I could about airplanes, from models to full scale and everything in between. So. I was never bitten by the bug. That's just
you were born with it.
I guess, yeah. My very earliest memories are of flying things, and kites in the park with my parents when I was about 3.5. My dad's friends at the flying field, chasing airplanes down, the smell of monocoat and epoxy, just those sorts of things. It was always there.
Nice. You mentioned that your dad was a pilot. Was he a commercial pilot, or was it like a private, like he had a private plane or a private license?
Just a private pilot for fun. And he sort of went away from that very early on. It was expensive, and so he was always a modeler as well. So we just really gravitated towards the model stuff, and we did that. But occasionally, we'd go flying, or a friend would get a new airplane, or whatever, and we'd go do that. Spend a lot of time at the full scale airport on the weekends, and that's all kind of, aviation's intermeshed. There's not just sort of one thing. It's it was
just part of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is my life.
Well, it is your life now, but I mean, when you're growing up, it was an integral part of your daily,
for sure,
everything. Yeah, nice.
And we were between talking before the show, and then I had watched where you were interviewing on another show. You started piloting solo at a real young age, and I know your earliest memories, but even not long after that, you started flying solo real quick, right?
I did. I soloed when I was 6 on a 40 size glow powered, nitro airplane. It was a trainer called a Mini Mambo.
Okay.
Yeah, I saw, and it was sort of by necessity. I was always begging my dad to let me fly his airplanes, and he would hand the transmitter over, and I would, fly him around a little bit, but I never got to the point where I could take off and land. Um, and we just sort of, finally built a trainer and went out and flew it, and like the next weekend I soloed it. So it was something that I took to pretty easily, but I think it's because I wanted to so bad, right? I really had been around it, and it was, at that point, my entire life was model airplanes, right? That's all I can remember. So,
Mhm.
and I kind of never looked back, and that sparked a lifetime of aviation love.
Yeah. Now, you said your dad would hand you the transmitter. And I know today, like, Matthew and I have tinkered with the buddy box, and Matthew's a lot better at it than
Yep.
I am. But he handed you the transmitter. So what was that the
Well,
buddy system back then? Was just
so
physically hand it?
there were radio systems with a buddy cord, and nowadays they're wireless, right? But back in the day, you were 6 feet from each other max because you had a cord in between the radios. But not every system had that buddy box
Mm-hmm.
capability. The most basic radios didn't have that. So unless you had a pair of relatively high end for the time radios, you didn't have that capability. So yeah, I would I would grab the stick, and Dad would kind of help me a little bit and move me in the right direction. But it was really passing the transmitter back and forth, and we had a system worked out that if he said let go, that was an immediate let go, right? Don't keep trying to fix
Right.
it. And he eventually let me get deeper and deeper and deeper, and by that I mean lower, and do more stuff, and
Yep.
to the point where if you can fly around level circuits, and climb and dive and do all that kind of stuff, then you're pretty much ready to start taking off and landing, at least in some form. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of how it was. You took the training wheels off pretty early because there wasn't really much other way to do it.
That's a good
Mhm.
point. Yeah. It's interesting because, I mean, listening to that, honestly, I don't think it's a whole lot different than what I started to do with my kids. At
Yeah,
the,
Yeah,
sounds very
absolutely.
similar.
the very first time I went out with them and they wanted to fly, I basically sort of kind of wrapped myself around them with my thumbs kind of over their thumbs a little bit and sort of let them do the controls once it was high enough. And then be like, okay, I'm going to get this. And then I would let them kind of do their thing and then kind of, you know, tweak here and there. And, that ended up a little bit in disaster. And then I shortly learned how to set up the buddy box properly. And then once I
Yep.
had that, I could do it remotely without kind of hovering. That way he could feel like, while they're doing that, they're on their own and
Right.
they can gain that confidence that you need as a pilot, And then when they're like, "Oh no, Dad, I don't have it," and you're like, "That's okay, give it another try. I have you. You're okay."
Right.
And then and then
Yeah, buddy
hopefully
box is
they catch it.
a huge confidence builder. And the other thing I will say that probably helped me is at that point I was understanding how airplanes flew. And by that I mean, I'd been building paper airplanes and buying balsa wood slide together Guillo's models from the store and basically doing all this stuff. So I kind of understood how, if you bend the elevator up and throw it, it's going to do a loop. And so it wasn't like I was trying to learn how airplanes fly at the same time I was trying to learn how to fly an airplane. I kind of had, an idea. So I think that helped too. So, still to this day, I encourage anybody to play with that kind of stuff, paper airplanes, walk along gliders, balsa wood chuck gliders, all that
Hmm.
kind of stuff, because every bit of it has something to teach you. And, I
Mhm.
just was a sponge. I tried to learn everything that I could.
Yeah, desire I found, especially with kids, goes a long way to expediting the learning process. You can push a kid and they're not going to learn much, but
No,
you
you
get
gotta, you
them
gotta find the
excited
spark.
about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
you get them excited about it and they will zoom past you faster than you can say, hold up. I need to make sure you understand the basics before we go hog wild.
Right.
And then they're like, get out of the way, Grandpa." No, it's true. It's good. Excellent. So what about, I'm trying to think. So ultimately you end up, and we'll get into the story about how you earn, I guess, how you get asked to work in and or take over a hobby store. But before you got there, you became a very skilled pilot pretty early, right? You ended up, did you end up earning? You were probably going to competitions and just trying to get in everywhere you could, right?
Yeah, I did. I think my first competition that I was actually, entered in as a pilot, not just sharing a plane with my dad or, whatever. I think I was about 9 years old. And there are lots of little regional competitions, we called them fun flies, or sometimes it was pylon, sometimes it was combat, all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I did get relatively skilled pretty early. I want to say my first contest was about 8 or 9 years old, something like that. And with a borrowed airplane, somebody made me fly their airplane, so I did that. And it's just every weekend at the field, or even weekdays, I had a field behind my house where I could fly small sailplanes, and I was always out there doing that. And got to the point where by the time I was about 10, I was a very competent pilot. I could fly high performance, heavy stuff, and I would often be the guy that did all the maiden flights on whoever had something new at the field. And I learned a lot by doing that. Lessons beyond model airplanes. In other words, don't necessarily take somebody's word for it that their plane's ready to fly, because nothing feels worse than crashing somebody else's airplane, especially if it's something that you should have caught. So stuff like that. And I was very much interested in scratch building. There was always things in my head that I couldn't buy because either I couldn't afford it or it didn't exist. And so, that drove me to learn about all that kind of stuff. And I went to my first national competition when I was 13, I guess it was, pylon racing again, class called Formula One. And just had a blast, and I wanted to experience every facet of the flying things hobby, everything. So, I did it all, everything from indoor to free flight to pattern to, helicopters, giant scale, warbirds. I mean, you name it. I've dabbled in it. And in some cases, gone pretty far in it.
Yeah. Awesome. And obviously with that, you inherently kind of gain either reputation or at least a name with people who are in the hobby and go, oh, that's Red. He's give him your plane. And you're like, the kid's 10.
Well, I think, one of the things that I'm most proud of is that I can fly anything. And I don't mean that like, I'm a snob or something like that. I just mean I've developed a very well-rounded skill set that, I don't get nervous. I don't, wonder if something's going to fly. It's either if it's flyable, I can fly it. And that's helped me in my career because, as you can imagine, when you're flying research aircraft, that doesn't mean they're flying something proven all the time, right? It could be something something wild. So it's been a lot of fun, and it's something I really enjoy, and I absolutely don't take it for granted. I realize how lucky I am every day, and how much I enjoy getting to do what I do.
Excellent. I want to go back to a couple things because you breezed over like 6 different forms of RC hobby competition styles. I don't need to go into too much detail, but I would like to briefly cover okay, you said Formula One pylon racing. Formula One, is that because you the goal is go as fast as you possibly can, or is it Formula One because it's a spec, or?
Well, it is a spec, and the plane, they have rules. Limited displacement for the motors. The airplanes have to be a minimum size and a minimum weight, and it's 4 guys at once flying around a triangular course. So you stand in the middle of the base of the triangle and you fly around yourself, which is quite exciting. And it's a timed event. So not only do you have to win your heat, but they also keep track of heat times, and there's usually a separate trophy or what they call fast time, that sort of thing. And there's lots of different classes in the pylon racing genre, but Formula One is or was the fastest there was. There was nothing faster. Nowadays with modern technology, they're going quite a bit faster, but the modern equivalent would be quarter 40, what they call as a pylon class.
Right, and to be clear, and I think it's kind of obvious, but to be clear, all of this stuff is line of sight, right? There's no first person view. There's no camera on board kind of thing.
No, we could only dream about that,
I know.
back in the 80s, in the olden days.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of videos of a guy who put a camera system on, and he had his old, you seen this old, 20-inch box set that with the cathode ray tube and all that stuff. And there's like a video VCR in like attached to it so they can record. And they've got like a bunch of rabbit ear antennas trying to tune in the signal that they're getting from the plane. And it's, you can tell the rig that they're using is probably about like 3 pounds by itself, compared to the 16 grams or whatever it is we're using
Nothing.
now. Yeah. It's incredible.
We dreamed about doing that kind of stuff. And, a lot of guys would put a Instamatic camera or something in the cockpit, and you have a servo to trigger, and you take one shot and come down and wind it, but the modern stuff is absolutely amazing. What can be accomplished today. And part of what I'm doing now is, I have a small company, and I make kits of whatever airplanes strike my fancy. They're all balsa kits, but what I'm doing now is building all the stuff that I dreamed about when I was a kid, but the radio gear wasn't capable of handling. So, particularly with sailplanes, there were these, 2 meter and 100-inch sailplanes that I've always wanted to have a miniature version of. I love small airplanes. I don't know why. It's just a weird defect that I have.
Is it one of those things where like it's extra challenging? I mean, they fly the same sort of, but they're a little bit more challenging to get the CG, in at least my experience.
Well, for me, it was just having this thing that I couldn't get when I was a kid, and now I've got it miniature. That an example. I'm going to show you an airplane. Of course, nobody can see it.
Okay, we'll try to describe it.
This is a 32-inch wingspan airplane. That in real, when I was a kid, this was a 100-inch wingspan sailplane. It's called an Aquila, and it's just neat. I mean, these kits are rare now. They go for several $100s if you can even find one. And here I couldn't ever afford it when I was a kid. So here's one that I built that I can just go fly in the backyard or go to the local schoolyard or whatever.
Nice. Do you usually bungee launch that?
That one is yes, it can be bungee launched. I prefer to slope soar it, but yeah, it can be bungee launched.
Okay, slope soar. Okay.
Yeah. So I've been reimagining these classic airplanes.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's been a lot of fun.
So pylon racing is really just there's a bunch of blow up, almost like the wacky wall walker advertisement guys that are they're cones, I guess, or something. And you fly in the triangle around them or whatever it is. Do you ever? Yep. Is there ever a race course that's more like a Grand Prix where it's like a slalom left, slalom right, go the long straightaway, or is it more like an oval?
Yeah, line of sight is so hard to do that with. There were some guys about 5 years ago or so that were trying to kind of recreate the Red Bull sort of a thing. So they'd take, giant scale aerobatic type planes, and it was a much simpler course. You'd maybe come in and dive through the gate and maybe do a right turn and then kind of under a limbo and turn around, just something like that. It was pretty basic compared to the full scale stuff. And it's just so hard to judge without any FPV gear, So racing is all in a circle. It's all oval racing. With the exception of like some glider slope racing, you make left and right turns in a figure eight in front of you. That's about as complicated as it gets.
That's fair.
Mm-hmm. I mean, think about how much trouble we've had over our experience. When we're I'm right. I'm only this far away, and nope, that tree's totally not that close.
He's talking about. We both went out at various times with our Spitfires. We made the flight test Spitfires. They fly amazing. They're just really good planes all around, right? Joe's flying his. I flew mine maybe 3 weeks before that and got it hung up in a tree that I swear there was no way it was anywhere near that thing.
It's always further than you think. Always.
Always. And I'm like, Joe, man, you need to bring it back. That's way out there. He's like, no, it's not too bad. I'm like, remember 3 weeks? Remember those weeks ago that I got mine? I thought the same thing. Please.
Oh, that's when I lost signal.
Yeah, and then unfortunately that's of course when all things go wrong. So, but I'm not trying to dwell on that. My point was to bring in that it's it's always interesting, like when you have a plane up and there's no reference for depth, it's so hard to tell without a lot of training how far out you really are. You know,
Right.
it takes a lot of practice at staring at that plane and going, I know that that's 1,000 feet out.
And that's the trick with pylon racing too, is, you know, you have to fly as tight a course as possible without cutting. And that's really the trick, because most airplanes are fairly evenly matched because of the rule progression. And it really comes down to pilot. You either do well or you don't. And if you don't, at best you cut out and don't win. And at worst you hit the ground or a pylon or another airplane, you know, so it can be very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Let's see. Oh, what kind of things would you say you've done to improve that would improve your piloting skill, or any new guy? Like if Joe and I, we both want to improve our skills so that we don't lose as many planes as we learn. What would you say maybe the top 2 things that a new pilot could do to help increase their skills fast?
So there's a bunch of stuff, but there is one thing that I'm going to share with you that will probably sound dumb, but I can promise you that is absolutely the most important skill that you can learn no matter what you're flying. And
right.
you can start doing this right in the very beginning. There's nothing special about it. And most people laugh when I tell them, but by far the most important control on any airplane is the rudder. You know, I'm talking about a 4-channel type airplane, right, where you have rudder and ailerons together. And you know, it might not sink in now, but at some point, you know, if you go further in your career, or just you're trying to fly different stuff, but you're flying a heavy, fast warbird that likes to ground loop on takeoff, you know, how do you stop it from ground looping? It's rudder control. If you start flying precision aerobatics, where you're trying to fly straight lines, up, down, left, right, inverted, knife edge, all this kind of stuff, rudder is what keeps you on heading. You're flying in windy conditions and you're trying to hit the runway and not have the airplane tip over when you land. You have to use the rudder to crab it in and then line it up to the runway to land. So absolutely, without question, the best pilots there are rudder experts, period. You cannot get to the level of being you know, precision, great pilot without having fantastic rudder skill. One of my favorite things to do is watch crash videos on YouTube. We watch them every day at lunch at work, right? We just watch them.
Don't look at my video channel, please.
Well,
right, go ahead.
But you can see the guys that don't have rudder control. You know, they'll jam the throttle in and the thing veers left and snap rolls off because it's the classic case is a heavy warbird, but you know, it can happen with anything. You know, if you can hold a center line, you know, by far that will make you a better pilot than anything else that you can do, period.
Interesting. Nice.
And
okay,
so that makes sense, because I've, like, a lot of the techniques you're talking about, a lot of things you've talked about as far as windy conditions or setting up landing approaches in less than ideal situations, or just getting into more advanced flying like the knife edging, because Matthew and I attempted knife edging in the simulator. Interesting, we can get into multiplayer rooms in the simulator now, and you're right, all that really does boil down to the rudder. And as 4-channel pilots, it's very easy to just, you know, let's bank and yank and not worried about the rudder. And honestly, as frustrating as getting the rudder on this Corsair ride has been, which is due to my own build issues, you know, it's one of the reasons I'm adamant that I want it, is eventually I need to learn how to fly with that, because I need to start practicing coordinated turns for those reasons.
Well, as soon as you have anything with landing gear, the rudder becomes supremely important. And it's important before that as well. But, you know, ostensibly at some point, you know, you're going to want to fly more complex things that are maybe even cost more, right? Or maybe you've spent more time in them. I call that emotional debt, right? It might not cost a lot of money, but if you spent dozens or hundreds of hours on something, there's a lot of emotional debt wrapped up in that thing, and you want make sure that it's, as successful as possible. We have
Yeah.
a saying at work, the center line is reserved for professionals. And it's sort of a tongue-in-cheek thing, right? But what it really means is that, the good pilots land in the middle of the runway, straight down the center line. They don't need to stand behind the airplane on a takeoff. And that all comes from rudder control. If you ever want to fly 3D, there is zero hope that you'll ever fly 3D without a rudder in anything meaningful. So that's just how it is.
Nice. What would be your tip number 2? And then we'll move on.
That one's pretty easy. It's simply fly as much as possible. It doesn't matter how many times you've flown the thing and you've wrung every last ounce of performance out of it, or you think you know it inside and out, fly it. And then start challenging yourself. Try to fly a straight line down the runway and truly hold it straight. Try to land someplace where it's a little bit tight and, maybe over an obstacle, or try a spot landing or something like that. And then after that, it's just mainly fly as large a variety of different types as you can. Nothing builds a broader skill set than different aircraft. And every aircraft has something to teach you, no matter how simple it might be.
Yeah, I can't disagree with anything in that. That's for sure.
And good, like our experience, just in foam board, due to some of the inaccuracies that can occur, the same plane built multiple times is going to have different things to teach you. It's not always going to fly the same. That
actually ties into something else I try to preach, and I don't preach, but when somebody asks for help, these are the things that I tell them. Right after that, learning good piloting technique, the very next thing is proper setup and trimming. So, making sure your plane is square, the thrust angles are correct, the CG is right, the throws are correct. And if it doesn't fly hands off, straight ahead, what do you do to fix that? And, having a plane that's easy to fly is night and day different than having a plane that you have to fight. And it's amazing how much difference that makes. So, even the most basic airplane can benefit from usually from some sort of trimming. And I'm talking more than just moving the trim levers on the transmitter. I'm talking about, again, getting your CG right, getting the throws right, getting the surfaces equal left and right if that's what you're after. That's not always what you're after. But just whatever it is, making sure that it's correct. And, I've wrung more performance out of an airplane that somebody thought was a dog with simple tuning and trimming techniques than really anything else. So that's part of my ethos too, that I think that comes from the sailplane background, is that I'm into high performance, but that doesn't necessarily mean going fast. It just means to me getting the most out of whatever that combination is, right? So, getting it to fly as well as it possibly can.
Yeah. Yeah, that's excellent. Excellent advice. Thank you very much. You said you had kits. Is there a website? Well, how about this? Send us a website link that we can put in our show notes.
I don't have a website.
Okay, so we just bug you?
Well, I advertise on RC groups.
Okay.
Exclusively, and I really only do that because it's a side gig, and it's kind of, it's a double-edged sword, right? I do it when I want, and sometimes it gets to be so popular, it's more trouble than it's worth. I really like sharing, I really do, and I like sharing the stuff that I come up with in my head. And so RC groups, Alien Tech is my handle, alien_tech. And you feel free to give out my email address as well. But,
okay.
If those that want some of my stuff, they know where to find me. And I just don't have time to do a website. I'm not trying to be a business. I'm just, having fun.
Well, good. And ultimately, I'm just saying, I'm curious to see what kits you've put together over the years, or at least things that you've come up with and had a
Yeah,
lot of people say, "Hey, I want to build one of those. Can you help me out?"
I consider myself a boutique manufacturer, and what I mean by that, it means I'm cranky, and I'll do them for as long as I want, and then I don't do them anymore, and I'll go on to something else. So I tend to do I tend to do short runs of kits,
Mm-hmm.
and by short runs, I'm talking a few hundred, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like this micro glider, that glider I just showed you, I've done a series of 6 of them now, and I've sold about 1,000 of them altogether over the past 6 years or whatever it's been, something like that. And I'm working on a vintage pattern plane. This yellow plane behind me, it's a pylon racer. I'm going to kit that soon, and it's just whatever really strikes my fancy. I have a full-time job, and I like sharing, so I'll share as long as it's fun, and then sorry, it's not available anymore. I go on to the next thing.
Yeah. I think I like that idea. Again, it's, like you and me and Joe, like this is not you have a full-time job in the hobby, but making kits is not your full-time job. So it should, just like the podcast for us, it's not our full-time job. This needs to be fun. Otherwise, why are we doing it again? It should be enjoyable.
Yeah, I love the design. I love the design and the development of a new airplane. I absolutely hate the production. If I had somebody else to make all my stuff, great. I would just do the design, finish it, send it out into the ether, and somebody else would do it. And I've done that a few times, and there's some stuff in the works, and maybe that'll happen here shortly. But it's got to be fun. And I enjoy the design and development process far more than I enjoy making a couple of bucks on a kit,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's, I need to find somebody, a partner who's a finisher. You know what I mean? Like I'm the kind of guy who'll get things started and I'll get it, 80% in, and then, I need help to get it the rest of the way. So,
well, all my friends know if there's if lately the past 15 or 20 years, I've really gravitated towards more of the club level competition. I've basically retired from any big competition stuff. I just don't do it anymore. I enjoy it. I go to them once in a while, but I'm not, trying to, I'm going to go, I want to be world champion or whatever. Those days are past. So for me, when it's a club thing, we did a lot of racing at my home club. And if I was able, I would always scratch build my model. I love to scratch build. I build ARFs too, and I build kits and all that kind of stuff too, but I very much like to design my own stuff. So I always had a network of folks. They knew I was working on something. And I'm like, take this and put it together and tell me how screwed up it is so I can fix it. Because I don't want to build 10 of the same model to make the kit work right, because, as long as I've been doing it, I still make mistakes in every single thing that I do. And I have to get it to a point where I'm happy with it.
Right. Yeah. It's easy to not
get too close to the project.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. It's easy to be so close to it. You can't see what you just overlook the error because you don't see it anymore. You have to come away and either get fresh eyes or literally go away for a week and come back and then look at it. And in an instant you'll go, oh, that's wrong. What was I doing there? But it's only until you move away. You see it.
And that's one of the things that I really like about NASA is that it's different all the time. I don't build 10 of anything. I build 1, maybe 2 of something, and then we move on to the next project. Or we have some aircraft that just serve as a utility truck, right? We'll carry stuff in it, payloads, cameras, electronic gear, whatever it might be. But it's always something different. So that's what really drew me to NASA, is that opportunity to get out of the rut. The prior job I had was fantastic, flying UAVs. I was a chief pilot for another UAV company, and it was great. It was great. Well, we did all the R&D, and it was very successful, and we sold it to, many different nations around the world, except for that meant I was gone all the time. I was gone to all these places that, when you build things that support the warfighter, you don't go to, Tahiti or Hawaii, right? You go to the sandbox or somewhere where things aren't, there's civil unrest, right? So that got old. Once we got into production, when it was doing the same thing over and over again, that I'm not an assembly line worker. I don't do well in that environment.
Yeah, and that's as important to know about yourself as any other thing, right? You speaking of that, so in between, I I guess in between doing all these contests and whatnot, you ended up gaining, I guess, a reputation as one of the guys to go to from your hobby store. And at a certain point, from what I understand, how did you come about? Ultimately, is what I'm coming around to is how in the world did you end up having somebody say, "Hey, you want a hobby store?"
Yeah, so we had a great local hobby shop. It just did airplane stuff. He had a few boats, but no cars because we had a car shop in town. They had a gentleman's agreement; they wouldn't compete, and you get everything there. And that was Scratch Builder's dream because I could get wood there, I could get glue, I could get covering, I could get paint, I could get fiberglass, I could get all the stuff that I could need to, make these things up in my head and whatever else I was doing. And yeah, I'd lived in the same place for 40 years. So I got to know a bunch of people and a bunch of friends. And one day I was in the hobby shop and the owner said, "Hey, I'm thinking about retiring." And that was like, oh my God, you can't retire. Where am I going to buy stuff from? Right. So, it's total naive.
You
right?
can't leave.
You
Where am I
can't
going to get all
leave.
my stuff?
Yeah, it's exactly what I thought. And he said, no, I'm going to sell. And I'm like, okay, well, just, you've done a really good job here. I hope somebody that you find does as good a job. And you have anybody in mind? And he said, yeah, I got somebody in mind. I'm like, great. Well, I hope it works out. I'll see you later. He's like, wait a minute. I said, what? And he said, well, I was thinking about you. And I'm like, what? What? I was, I was a car painter at this point and loved it. It was a great job. It paid me well, so I could go play with model airplanes. There was never that, junction in my head that said, well, maybe I can make a living doing, what I already love to do. And yeah, that's how I end up becoming a hobby shop owner. And I look back on it. Those were some great times, but it was also a pretty poor decision on my part. It was, the internet was becoming more and more prevalent, and it was a very, very hard business. I ended up losing my shirt, right? I made it for like 8 years or something like that, and just couldn't do it anymore. And fantastic experiences I got to share with people. I got to help a lot of people. I got to help the local clubs, put on contests and, do all that kind of stuff, all the stuff that I loved. But the business part of it nearly ruined the hobby for me because you have to make a living. I had a wife and kids, and
you got to pay the bills and put the food on the table and pay the lights at the store on and all that stuff.
That's right.
And
it was
to do that, you have to
full on retail shop, in a shopping center, and so it wasn't like it was tough. And I did pretty well for a few years, and then gradually it just went downhill. And I wasn't able to recover. I got out while I could still get out with my head. So there you go.
Yep, and that's what you got to do. In any business, right? Like you have to set your okay, if I'm here, I need to get out.
Well, I learned a lot of things, and if I would never do it again, but if I were dumb enough to do it again.
Yeah, what advice would you give somebody who's dumb enough to say, I want to make that my hobby, or I want to make my hobby my living?
Get a business person to run it for you and do what you're good at. In my case, I was a great salesman. I was a great customer service guy. I was a great, guy that could figure out where the pulse of the hobby was, and I could order all the right stuff. I was horrible with the bookkeeping. I was horrible with, all the stuff that you have to do behind the scenes to run a successful business. And, because that wasn't fun. That's not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be a bean counter. I wanted to go play with airplanes. So, it takes a team. I don't know that any one person could have a successful hobby shop. It takes a team of people.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And with the, with the Amazons and the Bang Goods and the Flight Tests and, and Hobby King and everybody else out there, it's too easy to not shop at a hobby shop. You can't possibly carry everything. So, it's a losing proposition in my opinion, unless you're diversified enough, trains, doll houses and whatever.
Yeah. Our dollhouse, our local hobby store, is run by a guy his father owned it, and he's got it now. And they do model trains, plastic modeling, and airplanes with a tiny bit of cars. And like you said, there's another shop across the town that has all the cars. They carry some just because people come in and going, where can I buy a car? You know, it's like, well,
Right.
there's a couple there, but go across town, you know. Or where's the guy? So I'm not sure kind of how but I think they've just kind of said, look, we're here to help the modeler, the people who want to scratch build. You know, like, yes, we've got
awesome.
kits and yes, we've got this, but we have institutional knowledge, and, you know, like, come in and buy the produced kits, because that helps keep us in business. But what we want to do is get you scratch building ultimately. Like, that's our goal, is to move you from these things up top here, which are easy, to going over there and picking out all the balsa you like, and grabbing some of that covering, and you know, let us help you get to doing something interesting.
Well, those sound like my people, so tell them I said hi.
I will. I'll tell Alan he said hey. But yeah, he always hangs a couple scratch built models up on the ceiling for sale. There's always some guy local from the club who said, "Yeah, I don't want that one because I want to buy this one over here." when you sell that one, I'll come pick up this one. You know, there's always a couple of guys like that. So, what would you say?
That's great. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's he. Honestly, I wish. In some senses, I wish he was a one-stop shop. I could go in and get everything I need, because then I probably would be less likely to go on Banggood, and while I'm there, go, ooh, look at all that, ooh that.
Yeah, it's
because they do
tough.
have everything on there.
Yeah,
and it's like, you know, that's okay. But I do go in there and I try to buy when I am looking for a kit. I try to go there when I can buy it. So. So what would you say would be one of your favorite memories from running that store, or even just like being a helper?
Yeah, it was, you know, I don't have any one memory, but there were a few things that stick out. One of them, this is not a great memory, but I missed all the flying competitions because I had to work. Right, so that kind of sucked. It's a retail thing, you know, so you're open every weekend and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But let's not dwell on the bad. I loved the time I had there, and it was fantastic.
Sure.
I loved helping people solve problems. I really did, you know, because for me, again, it was sharing the magic of flight, and whatever I could do to help them. You know, I'd go meet people on the weekends or one night after work. I'd go to their house, help them start the motor and tune it, or, you know, help them set up the radio. They could bring them in, or I'd go to the flying field. We'd help people fly, you know, all that kind of stuff. And there were a lot of really funny things that happened too. I had one customer. It turned out he was a NASA engineer, right? He was retired, older guy, but you know, he had bought a fuel pump from me, and he called me on the phone and he said, "Hey, the fuel pump is backwards. You know, it's sucking fuel instead of pushing fuel." And I said, "Well, you know, flip the switch on it. You know, it'll go the other way. You know, there's one way for drain and one way for fill." And he says, "Oh, no, it's a manual one. You got to crank." And I said, "Well, crank it the other way." I don't want to do that. He wanted to crank it one certain way. And so finally I got him to change the tubes, you know, you have the input and the output. You just flip them to the side,
switch
to side,
them.
you know, but I
I'm not
laughed.
an ambi cranker.
Yeah, I laughed, you know, and then I had another guy that he lived about an hour away, and he had bought a flying wing, foamy flying wing glider. Like, it's called a Zaggy, which they're not really around anymore, but
look, you talk to anybody who's been in the hobby for,
they know what a Zaggy is.
More than 10 years. That's pretty much the beginning of all flying combat wings, is a Zaggy.
Absolutely. Well, he had bought it, and I never saw him around because he lived on the coast about an hour away from where I was. And, you know, he would buy stuff, and then I wouldn't see him for 6 months, and then he would come back in and get a few things. And so we never really developed a friendly, I mean, it was a friendly relationship, but it was never, you know, "Hey, Joe, how you doing? What's going on? You know, I'll see you this weekend," that type of thing. Well, he had been building stuff, and he bought this foamy wing, and it was the first one that he had ever built, or I don't remember exactly how it went, but, you know, he called me. He's like, "Man, I cannot get this thing to fly." And so I went through the whole thing. I'm like, check your CG, make sure that's right, and, you know, check your control throws. I mean, it's a pretty simple thing. You know, you go right, the right aileron goes up, left aileron goes down. Some people have problems getting the mixing right for the elevon, so we worked through all that. And he's like, "Yeah, man, it won't even fly." I'm like, "You know, it's not really a matter of the wind." I said, "Just throw it off the hill. Does it glide?" "No, man, it falls straight to the ground." I'm like, I don't know. I'm absolutely stumped. But if you bring the airplane in, happy to take a look at it. We'll go out in the parking lot and I'll throw it. We'll make it fly. "Okay, great. I'll be down." he had lots of questions about taping the thing up and, using packing tape and all that. So he brings it in.
Yeah.
And the second I saw him, I knew exactly what the problem was. And I absolutely could not believe it. I had to keep myself from laughing. So he comes in with this airplane, and, Zaggies are cut out of EPP foam with a hot wire where you have a kind of a rectangle of foam, and then you cut the airfoil shape out. Yeah. And then you have these leftover shucks, the upper and lower core beds.
Yeah, and they look like cradles almost.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he had, glued and taped this thing all together with the radio in it, push rods, the whole thing, with those beds completely still on the wing. So it was a 2-inch thick chunk of foam.
He was trying to fly a brick.
Yeah, and he had, and the control rods come out of the top of the wing, and of course they're going to hit the foam, right? So he had cut these big channels in to let the push rods move, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this. So, I politely told him, and he felt horrible, obviously, right? He was embarrassed, and
he felt like a heel, like, oh my gosh, how could I make that? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't even know what to say, what? So, that was a relatively amusing thing that happened, and
yeah. But that happens. That's the thing, though. That's a great story, though. So I'm obviously this program here is dedicated, at least in my mind, to the beginner. But like that's a mistake. You don't have to not just beginners make. Like if you don't know how something's supposed to be.
That's right. And that taught me. Yeah, it taught me a lot about perception, right? Because you take these things for granted. And it's the same thing. You're too close to the problem. You can't, process how this could happen. And there you go. So
right. What was it? There's like a meme about, the different ways a project can be seen. And like by the accountant, it's an outrageous luxury mobile. Like by the kid who's going to use it, it's an amusement park. By the engineer, it's a series of numbers and letters, and they go through different professions and how everybody kind of sees it,
That's
and
right.
and nobody sees it even remotely the same, even though it's all the same product.
So that that whole experience, the hobby shop, not that story in particular, but taught me a lot about, dealing with people and expectations and all good things, right? I learned so much just about being an adult and being a person interacting with people. It was a great experience. I love it.
Nice. So after the hobby shop, you decide like, okay, this isn't working. How did you get into NASA?
So, I'd been flying sailplanes for many, many years. We had a local inland slope soaring club, and one of the club members there, named Mark Allen, he built some of the very first high performance gliders, so competition gliders, and he had a tremendous amount of success with his designs. His designs won many world championships for years. So very well-known designer. And he and I were friends, so we'd always talk, I'd love to talk airfoils and, all the minutia of design with him. And, we'd stayed friends over the years. And when I owned the hobby shop, he was working for a company that was designing a UAV. So, he knew that I was a decent pilot. And, 4 or 5 years before I closed the hobby shop, he came over and he's like, hey, we got this new design. The boss wants me to fly it, and I know I can fly it, but I really want you to fly it because, you've got more experience and you're the right guy to fly it. I'm like, yeah, I'll fly it, whatever. And so I started doing development flying for this company. And when it was time to close the doors, I went to them and I'm like, hey, I would work for them, not even a weekend a month, less than that. Sometimes I'd go for like a week at a time and do a demonstration or help them with some development or something like that. But it was very sporadic, nothing even remotely close to a full-time gig. And so when it was time to close the shop, I'm like, hey, I'm just letting you know I'm closing the shop. They used to buy materials from me too, by the way.
Okay.
No, okay.
I'm closing the shop. I don't know what I'm going to do, but if, if there's room, I would love to come and work for you guys. And so that's how I got hired at the UAV company. And so I was there, for, I don't know, 10 years, I guess, something like that.
Nice.
And in that time, we started going to NASA at Edwards Air Force Base to fly our stuff, because in the beginning, you used to be able to fly UAVs, commercial UAVs in the national airspace. There wasn't, the FAA kind of didn't really know what to do with you, so they didn't really make you do anything. You just kind of was just be safe, right? Well,
Yeah.
that eventually changed, and we were also developing bigger, heavier, faster, more serious type stuff. So we would go to NASA to rent the restricted airspace and fly our stuff there. So that's how I got to know some of the folks at NASA. And I was always very curious, just like everything else in my life. I'm like, hey, show me your model lab. Hey, show me this airplane. Hey, can I look around? What's in that hangar? And so got to be good friends over a period of about 8 years with some of the, not only the engineers there, but the range safety folks and the people who would host us. And one of the guys that would host us was also the guy that was in charge of all the subscale stuff at the center. Now, he wasn't a pilot, but he was the chief engineer. He would make sure it all, the paperwork was followed, and the funding was there and that kind of stuff. He didn't actually work on any of this stuff, but he was a manager, I guess you would say. Really nice guy.
Sure.
And so he called me one time. Hey, Red, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, we're getting ready for a test or whatever. And he says, well, hey, the person in our model lab is terminally ill, and hasn't been able to work for almost a year, and we've got these projects piling up. How would you, are you interested? Would you like to come to NASA? I'm like, no, absolutely not. I'm not interested at all. And I wasn't, because, I had this great job at this company called Arcturus that I'd been at for, 8, 10 years, whatever. And it was going great. I, felt like I had the world at my fingertips, and I was really loving it. And, about that time, Arcturus was starting to change. It was going from a smaller company to a bigger company, and we were selling to, foreign governments and our own military and things like that. So I was traveling a lot. And well, this conversation literally went on for a year and a half. He would check in with me every couple of months. Hey, what's going on? Are you ready yet? And I'm like, nah, I'm not really ready yet.
Yeah.
And my wife happened to overhear the conversation one time. This is probably a year in. And she's like, hey, who was that? I'm like, oh, that's Mike at NASA. She'd heard me talk about him before. In fact, she had met him because she had come to NASA with us one time to visit, And she said, well, it sounded like he was, what are you guys talking about? I said, well, he's offered me a job. And she said, well, what kind of job? I said, well, they want me to work in their model lab down there, basically doing the same thing I'm doing, for Arcturus. And she said, well, what did you say? And I said, well, no, I've been telling him no for a year now. And because I have kids in school. My whole life was in Santa Rosa where I grew up. I just, again, my short-sightedness didn't see the bigger picture, and it was really my wife that said, well, let's talk about this. What kind of job is this, and what kind of money and what kind of benefits? I'm like, I don't know. I told him no. I've been telling him no.
I've been ignoring him for a while.
Yeah.
Why would I get into all that if I'm not interested?
It was always friendly, but he was persistent, and so finally because I thought that she would never ever consider it. And so, we got to talking about it, and she said, well, it sounds pretty good. Why don't we look into it? And I said, well, realize we're moving 500 miles south. We got to sell our house. We got to pull all the kids out of school. They're going to leave all their friends. Leave all my friends. You can leave all your friends. It's a pretty big step. And
big decision,
yeah. So it took about a couple of months to decide that it was something I might be interested in. And the more I thought, deep down I knew absolutely, yes. If I was a single guy, I would have been packed up that night and gone to NASA. But with a family, it just wasn't in the cards, right? I was thinking different. And my wife, she works from home, so she could work anywhere. And about 6 months later, it took that long to, talked to them, and they made me an offer, and we worked out all the details, and that's how I ended up there. So I made the move, and I don't regret a second of it. It was absolutely the right choice. Our life is so much better in so many ways because of it. And some of the most minor ways, I get to play with airplanes every day, and I get to work with, some of the smartest people on the planet. And I'm doing R&D, which I love. I'm not, in some foreign country training other people how to use this thing that, is a complicated machine. And it was just the right time. And, I never look back. Here I am. I joke that I'll probably die here. I hope it's not at my desk, but this is my forever job. I don't intend to ever go anywhere else.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you got a really sweet gig, and that, things really played out, rolled well for you. So congratulations on all that.
Thank you. And when I got there, the lab was an absolute disaster because the person that had been working there wasn't able to.
Hadn't been there for years now, right?
Yeah, it's been almost 2 years at that point. And then some people, there were still projects going on. They had a couple of the guys that flew RC that would help out and fly some of these things once in a while. And the lab was just destroyed. There's crap everywhere because there was nobody in there. It was just kind of a catch-all sort of thing. So, day one, I hit the ground running, and I'm like, can I clean up? What in here do I need to keep, and what can I? They said, do whatever you want, just don't get rid of anything permanently, and we'll work it out. So, obviously I knew I had to keep the airplanes and that kind of stuff, but there was wires and connectors and just crap everywhere. So I cleaned that all out, and it took like a week. Pretty good sized lab with several rooms. And then about a month after I had been there, and you have to understand, well, I'm sure you can imagine, NASA is a giant, right? There's so many processes and procedures, and it's NASA. So every day I'm like, what else don't I know? What else? I feel like I'm a fish out of water. I know airplanes, but I don't know anything about flight research, really, because it's NASA. I've done some, but it's not NASA. Writing reports and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, what is the process here? Right? Like, because at NASA we do it this way, and everywhere else, like it's not necessary to do half of the things that you do at NASA, but there's a reason for almost everything you do, I'm sure.
Well, I was confident that as far as like the UAS and the operations, that stuff, by far and away, I'm confident. Good, I got all that. That's not a big deal. We used all the same autopilot systems, and it was very much the same sort of equipment. And I learned over time that in reality, I brought them out of the Stone Age. Honestly, we can talk more about that later. But they're very rudimentary operations wise. Now the research is cutting edge, but the way they got it was painful. And that's one of the things I'm most proud of is the difference I've been able to make in my time there, and where we are today from where we were 8 years ago when I started is like you can't even imagine. But a month in, a friend of mine that I've got to know there named Dr. Oscar Murillo comes in, and he's one of the Prandtl guys. If you read into the Prandtl stuff, you'll see Oscar's name. And he's like, hey, I started in May, and I just had my 8-year anniversary actually a couple of weeks ago.
Congratulations.
And I started in May, and like early June, he's like, hey, are you ready? The interns are coming. And I'm like, oh, we get interns, huh? Yeah, okay. He's like, cool. There's about 50 of them on this Prandtl project this year. And, you're a mentor. I'm like, what? What? I can't even dial the phone. how am I supposed to teach somebody? So it was right out of the frying pan into the fire. And immediately, there's all of these really smart kids, descending on the lab, and we're flying these vehicles, and right away getting some really meaningful data, and but overall a fantastic experience. I look back on it now and I laugh because I was deer in the headlights, but the future is kids, and you have to enable that and inspire that. And to see, these kids, some of them still in high school, you can apply to be an intern when you're a senior in high school. We laugh because we call it all velocity and no vector. Like they have all this energy, but they don't know where to go. Right. So so you just try to contain that, but it's an amazing workforce. They're full of enthusiasm, and, they'll work crazy hours and all that kind of stuff. But the Prandlt project as a whole, 90% of it is intern run. They do all the heavy lifting. They do all the data crunching. They do all the flight recording. We build the vehicles and we operate the vehicles, but everything else is intern, which is really cool. So, and I end up hiring one of the interns a couple of years later. And, now we're at 4 full-time pilots, and we manage a fleet of 20 plus vehicles. About a year in, the center. So I'm a contractor. I work for NASA, but I get paid by a different company. I'm not a civil servant.
Okay.
But all of our flight department for the piloted stuff, they're all civil servants, right? That's kind of just how NASA is structured. Well, about a year into my tenure there, they came to me and they said, well, we realized that you're by far the expert in unmanned aircraft and operations, and we're going to name you chief pilot. I'd only been uninhabited systems technician at that point, right? It was just a whatever contracting thing. So that was kind of a big deal. The chief pilot at NASA had to write me a letter, and I was the very first non-government pilot that NASA has had in this particular operation. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, you're breaking new ground there.
Yeah. So since then, I've come to realize that NASA is incredibly advanced and incredibly behind in a lot of ways. The research. The research is cutting edge,
yes.
but I laugh, I joke. It's cutting edge research at a glacial pace.
Right. Yeah, so, they have all the trappings of the big government agency as far as paperwork and speed that things get processed. Yeah. But they're working on things that people haven't barely even thought of.
Well, and that's exactly right. So I say that we work on the minutia of the how and the why that a for-profit company would never take on because there's no business case for it, right? You can never make money doing it. But that research that we do lays the foundation for, aerospace to do things, and for all of the overhead and the red tape and the processes and all that, it's absolutely worth it, because when you do get data out the other side, it is of impeccable quality and is respected, around the world. So, I had to learn that. That's another thing that I learned. That it's just different. So now I embrace it and I love it, and it's all good.
Mm-hmm.
So
when you say, go ahead, Joe.
Nope.
I'm sorry.
Go for it. I was about to move on to another question.
No, I was going to say, when you talk about impeccable quality, in the sense that the data is incredibly thorough, and that no stone is left unturned with, what the output. I guess what method you went through to get the output. It's like it's very clear.
Yeah,
everything's been figured out and tried.
I wouldn't say everything has been figured out, but I would say that the data collection is typically thorough, and that you can hand that data set to somebody else and they can reproduce the results, right? Or at least rerun the experiment and have a reasonably solid foundation that they can trust that, what you're giving them was collected with as much care and as much quality as possible, right? Because we record things that you can't even imagine, right? And it might seem innocuous, but you go digging through the data looking for some specific parameter, and you're like, oh, it's there, there it is.
Yeah, as opposed to thinking like, oh shoot, I should have done that. Right. For example, like what would you think that the data that was gathered that probably didn't initially think like, okay, we're going to need to grab some of this, and it was in there so that way later if you
Yeah,
needed to use it.
I can give you a great example of that. And it's in the Prandtl project. So there's a thing called moment of inertia, where every aircraft has the weight distributed throughout the confines of the aircraft, and it affects how quickly the airplane reacts and damps to control inputs, gusts, things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Typically, that is all gathered and measured for a flight control system. And you gather all that data, and you end up making a gain set, and your autopilot can now fly this weird vehicle that doesn't fly like a conventional vehicle through
Right,
fine-tuning of this gain set.
Yeah.
All right, so and the way you gather moments of inertia, you can do it analytically, but if the vehicle is sized in such a way that you can hang it, you actually swing it. We use something called a bifilar pendulum method, where we'll hang the vehicle from two strings, and then we'll spin it and let it oscillate, and you count the period, and that gives you that, and a lot of math gives you the moments of inertia, and you do that for all three axes. Well, the first Prandtl aircraft had zero flight control system, and it was simply a radio controlled model. Simply a 2-channel radio controlled model at that, pitch and roll only, no yaw control whatsoever. None of them have ever had yaw control, by the way.
Well, that's the goal, right? The whole point is, if it's working right, you don't need it.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So, we gathered all that data. It started out to be an exercise for the interns to teach them how to do it, because, we get folks that have an aerospace major. We also get folks that are lawyers. We get folks that are English and history majors. It just depends. So you never know what folks know or what they don't know. So you go through kind of everything to teach them the foundation. And it's a selfish thing, because we want them all to go to aerospace, right? So you expose them to all the cool aerospace stuff, but not everybody ends up in aerospace. And I can tell you a story about that, a recruiting bit that I use that addresses that. But at any rate, we gathered all this moment of inertia data and just collected it. And we knew what it was, right? We started looking at the ratios and things like that, but it's more of an aside, not really we're going to do something with it. Well, later on, as we're developing the Prandtl-Ms, which the M is the Mars aircraft, they're the smaller aircraft. We were flying the 12-foot and the 24-foot span, 12.5-foot, 25-foot, span models. And they flew beautifully. Once we got into the lower aspect ratio Mars aircraft, we crashed probably 20 in a row. They would come off we'd launch them from another airplane, and they would, go into a spiral. Sometimes they'd be mildly controllable. I could fly them for a while, and then they would get upset and they would tumble or do whatever. And we're like, man, what are we missing? So we start digging through the moment of inertia data, and we figure out that we've got an inertial coupling problem. It's not an aerodynamic problem. So we had been thinking up to that point that it was all aerodynamic, like we didn't have the twist right, or the aspect ratio was wrong, or the hedral was wrong, or something, right?
Right.
Because again,
it's the lowest common denominator, I imagine.
Yeah, the tool to design this airplane doesn't exist yet. We're writing the equation that lets you do this. We start with a twist and kind of a known plan form, but when you change that, everything else changes too. We learned a lot in this program. Took me honestly about a year and a half to wrap my head around everything that was going on to be able to confidently say, I understand now what's going on. But anyway, so we started looking into the data, and we're like, oh, well, the moment of inertia is in the wrong direction. It's bad in the wrong direction to dampen roll. So it would start doing a roll oscillation. You get a little bit of yaw because you get some beta in there, and then it would tumble. So we solved the non-flying flying wing problem by adding weight along the center of gravity all the way out to the very leading edge of the airplane. So you project a line from the center of gravity outward, as far outboard of the center line as we could get it. We put a few ounces of weight. Solved everything. The plane flies now. We also ended up adding a roll damper to it, a little piece of, we're using a Naze 32 board, and we had a KK board in there and a couple other things. So some of the drone guys will be familiar with that. But, that's something that we didn't think was a big deal, but we collected the data, and now it's a massive deal. Every one of these Mars wings has pre-weighted because of this inertial coupling problem. So, that's a great example of not thinking that you're going to need something and you need it down the road.
Let me actually pop in there, Matthew.
Yeah.
And I want to. I've got two questions, and probably going to show some ignorance here, and for that I apologize.
No.
So what you're saying is you were starting to have where it would start to roll, and then it would just roll back, forth, oscillate, get bigger and bigger swings each direction. By putting a little bit of weight, like you said, draw a line out from the CG and CG or what, center of gravity or center of lift is where you were putting those weights.
Center of gravity.
Okay, center of gravity.
Center of gravity.
And when we think of balancing planes for balancing purposes and just flight in general, like, we always think front back. And there is something to be said. Yeah. And there's something to be said for, making sure that you don't have more weight in one wing than the other, so it does stay level, it's not fighting itself. But it sounds like you were putting the same amount of weight on both sides, and that was creating the issue. Now, was that because the weight then kept the wing from wanting to lift in the first place, or was that canceling something out? And maybe that ties into inertial coupling, because that's a term I've not heard before. And I have no idea what that means.
The X-1, the supersonic airplane famously suffered from inertial coupling too. And I actually have, I don't know if it's an original, but I have a test rig in my lab that's a silhouette of an X-1 with movable weights in it. And it's on this axle, and you can crank it. And it demonstrates what happens to the vehicle if the moments aren't correct, if the weights aren't correct. But what we do is analogous to a tightrope walker. By adding weight out at the wingtips, or at least as far out as we can get it, it dampens the roll response. So it makes it harder,
it slows
harder to roll. So if you think of a tightrope walker, without that long pole that they're carrying that sticks way out both sides, you really can't balance. But by adding that pole, it sort of makes it possible. So that's a really poor analogy, but that's sort of what we're doing. We're damping roll by adding mass.
Okay, because you're adding mass further out. It takes more energy to then induce the roll. And this will be a terrible analogy, but it's the one that came to mind. If, say, you sitting in a swivel chair and you swivel, and you kick your legs out. You spin slower, you pull them in, you spin faster. Is it similar that you're putting that mass out there? It's slowing that down.
Absolutely. So think of a teeter-totter. If you stood at a teeter-totter in the middle where the axle is, you could grab the teeter-totter with nobody on it, and you can move it at whatever rate that is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now put two adults on that same teeter-totter that are exactly the same weight. Now try to move that teeter-totter back and forth. You can't move it nearly as fast.
Because you have to accelerate that mass.
That's exactly right. That's exactly how this works. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I feel like my IQ just went up about 6 points, so thank you.
So that's how it was in this Prandtl program. Is there was all these little moments like that, that really were kind of aha moments, and eventually you put it all together, and you come up with come up with a not necessarily a solution, but at least an answer to some of the list of questions that you have.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Wow. Now, okay, so bringing it to our side of the hobby for a minute. Would you ever see a situation where it would be advantageous for a foam board hobbyist? Because we're already extremely lightweight compared to, say, balsa and such. But even in a balsa, would there ever be an advantage in that same thing? If we don't want a plane to roll quite as fast, but we don't want to reduce the throws quite so much, we just, slap a few ounces of weight in the very wing tips, making sure we maintain our balance proper? Or is that overcomplicating?
That's a pretty common thing in, well, I won't say common, but in sailplanes, especially slope racing, heavy and fast, right? The FAI, who is the world governing body for all things RC models. If you're doing an FAI...
What does FAI stand for? Sorry.
it's French, so I'm going to butcher it. Fédération Internationale Aéronautique, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I could have that wrong, but that's close to it. But anyway, particularly in slope racing, you weight the airplanes up to the max square inch limit, which is 24 ounces a square foot, I think is what it is. If you design or 11 pounds maximum weight. So if you design your airplane right, you reach 11 pounds at the maximum wing loading as well. But when I was racing, probably 20 years ago, I had an airplane that was incredibly fast, but it was nervous in turbulence. So it was nervous in the roll. And it was way before A3SX and, all these other types of stabilization systems.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up putting a bunch of weight in the tips without realizing I didn't know anything about moments of inertia. I just was trying to damp these unwanted roll oscillations. So I put some weight, like a half a pound or so in each wingtip, not quite in the wingtip, about 2/3 of the way out.
Mm-hmm.
And it made a night and day difference with how the airplane flew. So, I would say that adding weight, not necessarily to the wings, but adding weight to a plane that maybe doesn't handle turbulence well, raising the wing loading is a fantastic way to smooth out an airplane. Now, it makes your takeoff and landing faster. It stalls, at a lower angle,
quicker.
All that kind of stuff. But it's everything in aviation is a compromise, right? So it depends on what you're looking for. But yeah, you can, if you have a short wingspan airplane that you want a damp roll, other than reducing throw or adding expo or putting a gyro in it or something like that. Yeah, you can add some mass along the CG, and it will for sure help. The reason it was such a big deal for us is because we were not using traditional stability design. So in other words, we didn't have a tail. So in a classic case of this airplane with a vertical tail on it, it would probably just would have Dutch rolled, right? It wouldn't have done anything where it was going to depart. But since it didn't have a vertical tail, as soon as it got some beta on it, and beta is yaw sideways, right? Now the dihedral of the wing would tend to lift that wing, because now this wing on a swept wing with some beta on it, now one wing is effectively longer than the other because that wing is a straight wing and the other wing is swept back even more. So the forward wing is creating more lift. It caused the aircraft to roll. And it all happened in the blink of an eye because they're tiny little aircraft, right? 24-inch span, and they weighed quite a bit compared to a balsa model of a similar size. So it was the effects of that were much greater and the penalty was much higher. So we were forced into this solution that we were missing something that a traditional airplane would probably mask.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things about tailless craft. Obviously, that's where it seems like we're looking for the greatest bang for our fuel efficient buck, right? Is like, can we get away with not having this tail thing?
Again, it's all a compromise. You're going to need to have some sort of yaw control. Assuming this would ever go to a full scale, piloted airplane, you still have to land on runways, and there's still wind, so you're still going to have to crab and apply crosswind techniques to land. So there's going to have to be some yaw control, which is probably in the form of split elevons for drag at each wingtip.
Right.
So it's not a solution to everything. It's just researching a place that we're not thoroughly familiar with or weren't at the time.
So bringing it back around a little bit, I'm curious because you do a lot of stuff, but what's a normal work week look like for you? Like what's going on throughout the week, and is it set kind of week to week, or is it constantly changing?
It always changes. Particularly right now, to be honest, I've barely been into my lab in the past year and 4 months because of COVID. So I left my desk like March 13th, and I didn't of 2020, and I've been back maybe 24 times since then, and really only recently full days when we're doing this other NOAA thing. But I think one thing that would probably surprise a lot of people is we probably don't fly as much as you think we do. on good, when we're rolling and cranking along, we might fly an average of once a month. When you're, and that's because, there's a ton of prep work that goes into not really flying the airplanes, but all the prep for the experiment, all the payloads, making sure everything works. There's, again, we're not building things off the shelf and just going and operating a vehicle to go fly around the patch, right? There's always research involved. So that means that whatever you're doing probably is an experimental payload. That means it's been built by NASA engineers, or at least integrated by NASA engineers and running some custom software. So there's a ton of debugging. There's a ton of making sure that it works and all that kind of stuff. And then you might go fly, maybe for one day, or maybe a series of 2 or 3 days, or whatever it takes to get the job done. Or sometimes there's phases where you'll fly it and then you'll bring it back down and you'll change some stuff and then you'll go fly it again and that sort of thing. So it really varies, project to project. But there are no typical weeks. We have standing meetings for different projects. So I'm supporting any number of projects at any one time. And those projects always have at least one meeting a week, and usually more like 3 or 5, discussing different aspects of it. There's the project type meetings where you're discussing schedule, what you're trying to do, progress reports on, parts that are ordered, or vendors providing software or something. And, it's all about that. Then there's meetings discussing the con-op, or the concept of operations, how you're going to go test these things, what steps you're going to take, and what test points you're going to try to achieve. So we develop test cards where, each thing is scripted, where you have to be on condition at a certain point to gather some piece of data. There's system safety working groups where we try to think through of all the things that could go wrong, because a lot of these are very high value assets. I talked about the emotional torque earlier. Well, it's sort of similar. It might have taken this researcher 2 years to invent this thing, and they're going to go put it on an airplane and hope I don't crash into the ground. Well, how does that thing interact with the normal aircraft system, or how is the whole aircraft system as a whole gonna operate as maybe it's an experimental airplane, or maybe it's a proven airplane and you're putting a piece of hardware in it, whatever. So you got to think through all that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of paperwork, and a lot of not necessarily paperwork, but there's a lot of planning and effort that goes in. You don't ever just grab an airplane and go fly. It's always, a minimum usually of 3 to 5 days prior, you're going to fly.
That's a big departure from, like, you say, hey, the weather's nice, I got the afternoon, let me grab the plane and go.
Yeah. And part of that is, we're on an Air Force base, and we share the airspace with the Air Force. And there's, F-35s and F-22s and F-16s and T-38s and, B-2, everything flying around there. So we have our own airspace, but when we're not using it, it gets turned over to other folks, right? We can schedule it, but that scheduling takes a few days. One thing that I think would surprise a lot of people to know as well is that frequencies are very tightly controlled. Because we're on an Air Force base and it's a test Air Force base, they're doing all kinds of experiments with different frequencies and telemetries and all that kind of stuff. So our frequencies are pretty tightly constrained and scheduled as well. So you have to schedule around that. So not only do you need the range, you also need the frequencies, and then you also need the weather to cooperate. So that's only 3 of any number of things that have to be juggled at any one time to fly. For our vehicles that have some level of autonomy, an autopilot, it takes a minimum of 4 people to fly it. So again, it's not just grabbing the thing and going. So you've got all these, at least 4 people, and usually a lot more than 4, lined up schedule wise, and their parts ready, and so it's fairly complicated because everything's a one off.
You say there's 4 people ready. What are the basic for every flight?
So you have an internal pilot. So that's the guy that's sitting at the computer doing waypoints and doing whatever. You have an external pilot, which I'm an extra. All 4 of us are external pilots, but that's the guy outside that's really the pilot in command, because they've got situational awareness of what's happening around. They can see, they're talking on the tower to talk to the, getting clearance to take off and land, traffic, all that kind of stuff. You've got a crew chief, so fueling the aircraft, putting it together, maintaining it, doing all that kind of stuff. And then the fourth guy can be any number of things. It depends on the situation, but either a range safety officer, so they're there to make sure that everything's going right. More often than not, that gets delegated back to me. And you have a test conductor, somebody that's actually running the test, reading the test cards, and conducting the test. And then a lot of times you'll have a payload engineer, so you'll have somebody monitoring a separate station, doing payload stuff, whatever that might be, whether it's camera or RF or whatever.
So it could be all sorts of things.
Unmanned.
I remember you had a ton of pitot tubes, I think, running out on the Prandlt wing, at least in some of the initial stuff, just to see what was happening pressure wise across the wing. And then go ahead.
Yeah, we had flush pressure transducers, so they were embedded in the skin of the aircraft. 96 of them, and each one of those is its own system. It talks to its own pressure transducer, and then each one of those pressure transducers is on a board, and then there's like 6 boards, all coming together, and they all have to be time synced, kind of like the snap thing. You have to make sure all those pressure transducers are taking data at the same time. Otherwise, it's not a meaningful test.
Right. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. Otherwise, it looks like the wing is doing like the wave down the wing, as opposed to like the whole thing stretching at once.
That's right.
It would look like it's doing a wave. It's stretching along as it goes. And of course, you look at that and you're probably like, crud, the data's
And wrong. Just for clarification on this real quick, it was, correct me if I'm wrong, Red, but what Red's referencing when he says the snap thing is actually how we start our recordings, where we get going and we snap, all 3 of us, because we're recording on our own ends, so that afterwards I can take the audio and line it all up. So it's your system of snapping to get your data in sync.
Yeah. So in our case, depending on the complexity of the project, you might be able to deal with a second or maybe a half a second of being out of time, right? You can tolerate some level of mismatch, right? As long as you get it pretty close and we're not talking over each other or whatever, that kind of makes sense, right? Well, when you're taking data, sometimes milliseconds matter. So in some cases, we have an internal GPS clock in our ground station that's updating essentially server time, but it's really GPS time, to all the different stations and all the different instrumentation, so that when you collect the data from the airplane and the ground station and the payload, they're all time stamped. And a second is a year. It's entirely too large of a gap. So we're talking, thousandths of a second that they have to be synced. So it's the same problem, just solved a little bit different way.
Yeah, that's really awesome. To me, I mean, the technological, the technical challenge behind that explains why it takes days to say, okay, we're ready to fly, because no, you really can't fly if that isn't right.
It's a wasted flight.
There's no point.
If you don't get quality data, right? So
otherwise you can just go, hey, that flew, or it didn't, and that's not really helping the mission.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So there's all those things that go into making a successful flight. And then we also do, proficiency and check rides for the pilots as well. So we have a couple of different vehicles we use, and we do go out just for fun once in a while, just to, hey, we haven't flown in a while. Let's just go out, and everybody's going to, get a few takeoffs and landings in, and we'll do some maneuvering, and we'll exercise the autopilot, and, whatever it takes, and we'll spend a day doing that. So we all carry medicals. So just like any manned piloted vehicle, we have vision requirements. You have to pass a medical, and we have currency and recency requirements. You have to be checked out on a specific type of vehicle. So we have, several different types, rotary wing, fixed wing, powered, turbine, all that kind of stuff. So, there's always stuff to do. We get out and fly for fun as well.
Good.
Well, we call it proficiency, but it's fun.
So as
I guess I need to get proficient with this turbine today.
Yeah.
So as there's several days that are leading up to a flight, and again, and we kind of talked about it probably off air, but when say Matthew and I decide to go fly, and then probably you two when it's for leisure, we want to go flying. There's a real quick checklist most times, if we even have it written down. A lot of times we just rapid fire it off the top of our head of what are we taking, our pre-flight and all that. Surely like what you're doing's got a much larger pre-flight checklist, if you will. Can you briefly roll through that just to give us an idea?
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially on some of the more complex airplanes, because you're not just turning on a transmitter and then turning on a receiver and then, hey, we got a connection, we can go fly, right? It's really an integrated system. All these different things have to work together. So a pre-flight on our more complex aircraft can take anywhere from 20 minutes to 30 minutes, maybe something like that, and probably encompass probably a dozen pages of checklists. Basic power up, right? You turn the system on and do you have a link? Okay, that's the first step. Now, measure the link quality. Are you on the right channel? Are you getting the right amount of bandwidth? So is the pipe clear? Are you getting enough throughput? Okay, now you start setting up your flight plan. You set waypoints, altitudes, airspeeds. You set up your geofence if you're going to fly in an area where you can't, go out of a certain area. You set up your payload weights, your fuel weights, your flight timers. You look at your currents for all your different systems and make sure you got proper voltage, whether you're on a backup battery or shore power battery, or when the thing's running, is it charging properly? Because most of them have alternator systems on board, so you basically just fuel it and go like your car. But you have to check all of this stuff. And it can be fairly involved. So, we do that for every flight. So even if we just take off and do our thing and come back and land, we still run an abbreviated checklist. You can omit some of the stuff because it's what we call a quick turn. We have a quick turn checklist. Some of the systems are already checked, and you assume that since you just landed, they haven't broken, right? So you just reset for the next flight. But yeah, I think people would be surprised at how involved it is to fly some of the more complex, unmanned aircraft.
But like you said, there's a lot of equity in it, of various kinds, right? It matters. It's somebody's entire budget and project baby that they don't want it to just go, oh, well, we forgot to check something. Sorry. Like, that's not acceptable.
If we went out and like, oh crap, it crashed, I wouldn't have a job. It's really beyond that, right? The flying is assumed. My job is to get quality data back, and the more professional that I am, and the better job that we do, the more folks want to work with us. And we have a backlog of a year or more right now, so it just depends on what we're doing. But I've taken that same discipline, and actually I probably started with that discipline before I started flying unmanned stuff with my RC stuff, and that I absolutely use a checklist, but it's just not written down. And I really boil it down to two things that I do with every single model airplane that I have that never changes. One is whenever I start to fly a model, I preset all of my switches in one location. In my case, they're all up and they're all forward away from me. Right. And then I select individual switches for a particular model. I tend to set them all up the same, like my aileron dual rates up here on the right, and my elevator dual rates up on the left, and the flap switch, the retract switch, and the rudder dual rate, and mixing. All that's in the same spot. But the point is, the switches all start in a known base location, and then I switch them on as I bring up the airplane. So that's one thing. The other thing that I do is I do a control surface wipe or a control surface check every flight, even if I haven't touched anything, even if I haven't changed models, even if absolutely nothing's changed. I landed, slap a new battery, and I'm going to go again. Still do a control surface check. And the reason for that is if you do that every single time, it will become habit. And then when you do change models, or you do change a gain set, or you do something, you always do that control surface check, and you'll know that you're good. I've seen guys take off with reversed ailerons or, something like that over and over and over again. And if you do that every time, and you tell yourself you're going to do that every time, you'll never be caught with your pants down. You'll never be caught by surprise. So those are the two things that are absolutely etched in granite for me. And then, obviously the whatever particular system from there, you do some other checks. But if that's it, you do those two things, and your success rate is going to be quite a bit higher.
Yeah, I was going to say you get it started for success. Now, you check CG every time, or are you?
No. Well, on what? On the models or on work stuff?
We'll call it on models.
So if the configuration hasn't changed, no.
Okay.
But I do check, and here's the thing about CG. There is no one CG that's right for the airplane. There are some that are good, and there are some that are bad or better and worse. But there's also the right CG for you. So CG affects workload. You mentioned nervous and twitchy, right? Well, sometimes you want that, right? If you're doing combat, for instance, you want something that changes direction quick.
Right. So it'll be closer to the back end of the envelope as opposed to the front.
And so the other kind of pet peeve of mine is like somebody will buy an airplane, and or they'll build an airplane, whatever it is, and they're like, well, the CG is exactly what the manufacturer said, and the throws are exactly what they said. I'm like, okay, that's a great starting point, but we're going to change that. Well, they're like, well, no, that's what the manufacturer said. Well, the reality is that's just a starting point, and through
that
trimming,
should get you in the air so that you can see what you like
relatively safely, and so for me, CG honestly on my models is nothing more than my putting my fingers underneath it, and I'm like, okay, it's in the ballpark, it's close enough, because it's gonna absolutely change. I go through a whole trimming process, and I'll fly it, and obviously, a higher risk model, a heavier, faster model, I'll pay a little more attention to it. Sure. If it's a foamy or something else, I'll be, well, it's close enough. I know it's not at the trailing edge of the wing, so it's going to be flyable. And you tune the CG in the air. Absolutely, it's not something that you do on the bench. And when I say tune, it's input and response.
Yeah.
So I don't ever measure CG ever. I unless I have to because the plane's too big or something like that. But I put my fingers under it. It's in the ballpark. I go fly it, and then I adjust the CG based upon how it responds to me moving the battery around, or me moving some weight around, or whatever it might take. And where that CG ends up, I don't know. I don't care. I tune it till it flies correctly.
Okay. In that vein, when you hook in a battery, is a battery on a tray that slides with a servo, like set on maybe a pot, potentiometer, so that you can, as you're flying, you can go, okay, I need a little bit further forward to fly like the way I want, or you come back down and shift it?
Yeah, I just move the battery, and then I'll let market it. Either it's up against the bulkhead, it can't go anywhere else, or I put a piece of tape in there, or a Sharpie, or whatever, and then it just goes in the same place every time. And then I don't fly different battery packs unless it's something that I don't really care about getting. If it's something just to go fly, that's one thing. But like in a pylon racer, I fly exactly the same battery pack every single time. It goes in exactly the same spot. I have 6 of them, but they're all exactly the same. The leads are all cut exactly the same. It matters, right?
It does, yeah.
So CG is just a number. It's only a starting point. I don't care at all what that number ends up being. Doesn't matter at all.
So as a guy who's come up with, over the last 3-4 years, probably 23 custom unique designs, probably half of them are stuff nobody's ever thought would fly or cared, but I did. And we're talking like somebody drew a fantasy picture of some plane that they thought would be cool, and I said, I want to build that. So I did, and one of those kind of doing the rule of thumb thing and hope that it works. This should be about where the CG is, and toss it and hope.
Well, for I'm sorry, I cut you off again. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that there's a way to, if you don't have the experience and the confidence to go, I know it should be right about here and it's close enough to go fly. do a little bit of math, right? There are several online calculators that will handle weird shapes. And what a lot of people don't understand is you're not really setting a center of gravity. You're setting a static margin. And that's the difference between the center of lift and the center of gravity, right? The wider that margin is, the more stable the aircraft is. All right, it's exactly the same thing we were talking about earlier about moment of inertia and roll. It's the same exact thing for longitudinal stability. You spread those 2 points further apart, it's more stable. You set them closer together, and it's more lively. A 10% static margin is a great spot for just about every flying vehicle. Somewhere in there, that's a safe, a little bit nose heavy probably, but that's perfectly fine. So with all these weird shapes, there are multi-panel calculators that you can put in the dimensions, and it's going to get you, in the ballpark.
Okay.
And you go from there.
Yeah, nice. Well, I'm definitely just for all the ones that didn't go right. You know what I mean? So I apparently love the flying wings, the ones where it's a fuselage and a wing, and there's maybe a drag rudder, but I mean the coupling on it is just so short. I'm sitting there going like, why did I even think about doing this? But like they look really cool, and I'm like, all right, well, let me see what I can do to try to get this to fly. And those are the ones that I tend to have the hardest time with because, again, like you said, that static margin, that margin is a lot smaller on a wing with a fuselage that's just a little bit bigger than the wing itself.
Yeah. So one of the things that folks might benefit from is an understanding of short coupled airplanes, right? So the closer the elevator is, or the closer the elevator control is to the center of gravity, generally the more lively these aircraft are. So I hear a lot of folks, and again, this goes back to my setup thing. I'm a huge proponent of proper setup, getting it close enough, except for CG in my case. But, I never go out with an airplane that I haven't set up rates and throws on, and that I don't have a reasonable expectation that they're close to what they should be, right? I had a friend once that he wanted me to fly his plane, and he had a computer radio with every bell and whistle on it, and he just had max throw set up on everything. And his theory was, well, I want a lot of control so that if I get into trouble, I can get out.
Yeah, I've learned that's the wrong idea.
Exactly bad way to go. If you don't have that much control, you're not going to get into trouble, right?
It's easier to have very little control and be able to bump that up a little bit if you're getting into trouble.
Yeah, so
if
you should. I typically will set up at least a dual rate, most likely a triple rate. And again, through experience, I kind of know, hey, this is going to be hot, this is going to be medium, and invariably end up flying most things on low rate, unless it's a 3D plane. But,
this little guy, the controls are directly behind the prop. It might as well be thrust vectoring at that point.
So that will roll crazy fast, and it will pitch slower.
It will.
So,
but it'll still be really active.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
so the travel distance has got to be much smaller than you would have on other planes. And that's one of the things that I wasn't thinking about when I took it for its initial go. Which it flew, but it was a handful.
And make sure you use Expo. A lot of people, I think, underrate how good a crutch, not a crutch, but how good of a benefit Expo is. I run
it's a tool.
20 to 30% minimum on every single thing. And the reason for that is if you have a circular servo motion and you have your control rod coming out at the end of it, even if it's just an arm, it's still traveling in an arc, right?
Yep, exactly.
The more you get off of center, the less throw you get because your servo is now moving up and down more than it is moving left and right. True. So this is the very most
it's moving controls less.
That's right. And then as you get further and further in the travel, it moves the surface less. So you need, depending on your geometry, 20 to 30% just to get to a linear throw.
A linear control motion.
So for a fixed amount of stick movement, you get an equal amount of control surface movement, and it gets worse as you go out. But yeah, Expo is a very powerful thing that I think is underutilized by a lot of people.
Yep. Well, good. Thank you. That's seriously could be talking about this for hours. But so let's kind of bring it back around. You were talking that there's a large backlog of projects. So what kind of projects do you work on? Are they all aviation? I'm imagining they kind of are, but are they all like experimental, cutting edge stuff where there's always something that's like nobody's ever done this before? Or is it some stuff that's like, well, we're going to make a small improvement and we want to see how that works?
Yes, to all of the
tell us
above.
about that.
So it's everything. So, for instance, we've got one project right now. It's called Resilient Autonomy, and we're developing processes, procedures, and methods to allow unmanned aircraft to fly in the national airspace along with piloted aircraft and see and avoid and do all this kind of stuff, right? And there are certain systems on that. Well, first of all, I should say the aircraft that they're flying on eventually is a very complex aircraft. It's a vertical takeoff, a big, 150-pound vertical takeoff, and then it transitions into wing-borne, flight.
More like an Osprey, or more...
Kind of, except for they don't rotate. It's vertical takeoff, and it's got a pusher motor, and it pushes fast enough, and then the wings take over, right?
Okay, got it. Yeah.
So there are all of these systems that have to work together to make this whole sensor package be able to do what it needs to do to see and avoid other vehicles, right? And one of them is a vision-based see and avoid system, right? And just like your eyeballs, by having two cameras in what we call stereo vision, they can resolve distance because it's a fixed distance between your eyeballs. Your brain knows that when you reach out to grab something, it knows how far to move your hand to reach out and grab your mouse or your water, whatever it might be, because your brain is doing these same mathematical calculations through stereo vision to resolve distance. Well, if you put that on an aircraft, it's just trig. That's right. So, with it on an aircraft, now it sees something in the distance. It can get a relative bearing and a distance because of these stereo vision cameras, right? So that's just one of several sensors that need to go into this airplane. The airplane's not fully proven out yet, so we go and put these, in this case it's called visual odometry, on another aircraft that has flown before, and we go fly that system to make sure that it's gathering data right, it's working right, so that you're not relying on that system to provide data back to the sensor suite. That's critical, right? So now, we've gone and proven that system out. Now it can go in this other aircraft and be one of 6 sensors that are going to feed this massive algorithm to do the see and avoid stuff.
Okay, so, right. Yeah, to feed the AI. Well, it's not AI, but to feed the computerizing,
for lack of a better term,
guidance system. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's we call it risk reduction. So we take some of the risk out of the flight test by going and testing some of the things individually before you get all the way to the end and try to make the whole thing work. For me, the cardinal sin of doing UAV work is trying to parallel develop things and expect it to all come together at the end. So like you never develop a brand new airplane and a brand new payload system at the same time, and that one depends on the other to affect the final outcome, right? It never works. So you develop the airplane and then you put a new sensor in the old airplane, or you have a new airplane when you put in an old motor or an old control system that's proven. So we do lots of that.
Okay. And that makes sense. That's kind of like, I don't put my FPV system, which I'm still sussing out to like be reliable, like trying to figure out how to make it reliable. I'm not putting it on my experimental craft. I'm not putting on the Taylor car that I just flew twice. I'm putting on the Spitfire that I know how it flies. It flies really well. When it goes wrong, I know how typically it is and how to recover from it. Like it's a very known thing, and the FPV is the only unknown.
So we do the same exact thing. And, it's like you put it on your aero car that's never flown before, and then you put your aero car a quarter mile away and you have to use that FPV system to fly it for the first time, right? That's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's we do the same exact thing. Nothing different there.
Joe, you wanna get this next question?
You work on a lot of projects, you test a lot of things. I don't know if this would be like a percentile based question, but of all the ideas and concepts and things that you test, like obviously there are those that go well, there are those that aren't going to go as well, things that succeed that don't succeed, things that get implemented and don't. So what percentage or ballpark figure would you say of the things that you test and try out, work on, actually make it through and get implemented in NASA or the civilian world or military world, etc.?
Tiny fraction. And the reason for that is, we're not necessarily developing a thing that once you're done, you can take that thing and now it goes on that other airplane, right? What you're trying to do is expand the knowledge base of whatever it is that you do. Now, there are occasions where a specific piece of technology will, be pushed forward into some other thing. And that's like a case with AutoGCAS, which is Autonomous Ground Collision Avoidance Software. You can look that up, and it's basically, how do you keep the plane from hitting the ground when the pilot can't control it? So that was a huge success, and it's in every F-16, F-22, and F-35 that comes off the factory floor right now comes with that software that was developed on a model airplane in my lab. But
that's so awesome.
Just like I said earlier, that every model airplane that you fly has something to teach you. Even the failures teach you something, right? So you take a small piece of that. And so it's a gradual expansion of the knowledge and not any one particular thing like, okay, we conquered that. And, now it's going on to the next thing. And so it's not like that.
Well, because it's not a private company. I mean, you're not developing a product to sell specifically. No. You're developing knowledge base is what you're doing. Yeah, nice.
That's right. Yep, that's absolutely right. So, even the projects that are a failure, you learn about maybe how to do the operation a little smoother, or, hey, we could have integrated this software better, or here's how we should have checked that. We call them lessons learned. You pull lessons learned out of everything, and it's just data. It's not a pass or fail. It's just you got more data for whatever thing it is, and the idea with the data is that somebody else can 10 years from now go, hey, they did a kind of a similar thing. Let me go look at their data. And, oh, wow. Okay, this is what I'm looking for. And they've done a chunk of that. So now we don't have to do as much. We can stand on the shoulders of giants, basically, is how it works out. You just keep building and building and building on that knowledge base.
So which one would you say has been, those little learning steps, would you say has been the most impactful that's come through your lab while you were there? I realize you may not be able to talk about some of these things, but
it's hard to say. The AutoGCAS stuff was prior to my time, but we're still using pieces of that for resilient autonomy, so that's a big deal. Prandtl is pretty near and dear to me for a lot of reasons. One, I'm an aeronautics nut. I'm an arrowhead, so that new concept is like, wow, that was mind blowing.
I'm
it was
still
also
blown away that it's an old concept, really.
Yeah, it really is, that nobody ever looked at.
Yeah, go ahead. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a second.
But it was also pretty much my first major project at NASA, and it's been the longest research, and it's spawned. We've built 50 or 60 airplanes or something. I don't know how many, a ton of them. So for personal reasons, that's one I'm pretty near and dear to. It's my first published paper. That's pretty cool. I was an author on the paper, and
Congrats.
Thank you. There's another paper coming too. Eventually, the program is pretty much dead, but there's still some good stuff going to come out of it when the paper's published.
So the question I have keep going, and then I've got a question.
No, go ahead. That's it.
I will save the question for when we get talking on the Prandlt-D. But okay, so that's been impactful for you. Which one? What was one of your biggest surprises? As you were going through so far.
Oh boy, there's been so many. There've been a million aha moments, and we could talk for the next 2 hours just about Prandtl stuff. But honestly, it's probably not what you'd think.
I'll call you back.
Yeah, that's fine. The biggest surprise for me, and I want to be careful how I word this because I don't want it to come off wrong. But
Okay.
That NASA knew far less about unmanned aircraft than I thought they did. And that when I got there, it was like, once I realized, like, okay, I really got this by the balls. I know what's going on here, and I can help all of these people. And because NASA doesn't build airplanes, they don't design airplanes, right?
Right.
We pay other people to do that, and
You prove out concepts.
yeah. And in my feeble brain, in my life, I've designed more airplanes than everybody at NASA combined. They're just model airplanes, but that experience is massive, and I didn't realize how big of an impact I could make. And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back at all. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it's incredibly gratifying to see a problem that folks have been struggling with for a while, and jump in and go, oh my God, I can fix that like today. Like that's like low hanging fruit. That's easy. I got this. You go worry about coming up with the next whiz bang, theory that I can't even understand. And yeah, I'll make it work. So that was the biggest surprise to me. I thought that there was,
like they were all miniature manufacturers in their own garages and building planes left and right.
Yeah. And I thought there was probably more rigor in the flight test. So like there were very few checklists when I got there. And you have to understand the lab has been in operation since the 1950s. Dale Reed, the guy whose name is in the tagline of my signature, he developed the lifting body that eventually gave us the space shuttle. I mean, I'm 3 degrees of separation removed from this guy that did this.
Right, and that was what, in the 1960s? Is that 70s?
Yeah. He was a model airplane guy that built a lifting body for fun. And was taking home movies of it. His wife was, and this is not a NASA thing, and he brought it in and showed the center director. It's like, hey, check out what I did this weekend. I built this thing, and oh, look at it fly. And they got to talking about it and realized that, that would make probably a pretty good reentry vehicle. Mm-hmm. And that spawned the whole lifting body series. It was a guy playing with model airplanes in his garage. But, it shocked me at how little rigor there was in the UAS portion, at least the small UAS stuff. They've been flying bigger stuff, but so for my previous job, that's what I did. I developed all the checklists, I developed all the processes, all the procedures, and we were developing a vehicle that could be weaponized. And the amount of rigor that has to go into something like that, you can imagine is fairly big job, right?
Yeah.
So when I got
robust.
there, I was, very robust procedure. So when I got there, I'm like, oh, they don't have this, but I know how to do that. I can do that real quick. And then, so that led to the chief pilot thing happening relatively quickly, like I say, about a year after I was there, because I almost felt like I was cheating, really, that, I assumed that all this was already done and it wasn't. And for various reasons. And, here I could make a pretty big contribution and pump some rigor into this thing, and pretty soon we're flying lots and we're getting lots of data and people are happy. So that's why I have a year backlog, because of that.
Yeah, well, that's the problem when you do things well. Ask the mechanic who's got 20 cars he's got to still work on. Right?
That's right.
That's the guy. Either he's not doing it because he's lazy, but most likely he's doing it. He's got a backlog because he's just good at it.
Yeah. So I'm pretty proud of that. My lab is now a regular stop when we can have tours again. There's 4 places that everybody go, and then the lab's always there.
Yeah, I took the virtual tour earlier.
Oh, cool. Yeah, awesome. And, stuff like that. So I'm just proud of what it's become from, a defunct thing into a fully functioning research capability that is in high enough demand that I can now, I don't want to say have bargaining power, but like if I need a little bit of money to go do something, they're like, oh yeah, here you go. So it's, it's not hand to mouth like it was, for so many years.
Right. So is that probably what you're most proud of, is that it's come a long way since you got there?
Yeah. It's a fully functioning, respectable lab now. It's not just, oh, those guys are playing with model airplanes. It's like, oh, we can do some serious stuff. And, write papers that get published for, research that'll, doesn't ever go into the full scale world. It's good enough to do it on an unmanned aircraft, which is, mind blowing to me. That's fantastic.
Okay.
I was talking to a friend of mine so I work in an electric utility, and one of the electrical engineers was an aeronautical engineer. That's what he went to school for. And I'm like, okay, I've got this interview. What's one of the suggestions? And he said, ask him about the mechanisms he puts in the planes. He goes, which one are you most like kind of proud of, like the little baby of like, I came up with this thing that does this stuff in this little, he goes, because they're not going to, he's probably not going to have designed the whole thing. Like that's some other guy. So, but he's probably has put together some immeasurably helpful mechanism that solved all sorts of problems that people were having.
There's I don't know that I could point to one mechanism, but I would say it's probably more like an overall philosophy of how we operate. And we do have the capability. We do design circuits in house. We have a board cutter. We like to say that we're complete cradle to grave, so we can go from cocktail napkin sketch all the way through, giving you the data off the flying aircraft, everything in between. But it's really one of the biggest things that I probably did is we have a fleet of 4 aircraft. They're called droids.
Yep.
And it stands for Dryden Remotely Operated Integrated Drone.
Right.
Well, they're aeroids now because we're Armstrong, not Dryden anymore, but that's beside the point. But they were built a number of years ago where they have full battery systems in them. So in order to fly them, you have to maintenance all the batteries, charge all the batteries for the payload, the vehicle, the servos, the autopilot, GPS, computers, whatever might be on board, right? Well, one of the first things I did was I converted all of those aircraft over to alternator systems. So got rid of all of the batteries and truly made them fuel and go airplanes. You have to have an initial charge state on the batteries. But once you start flying, you can fly all day. You just land and refuel it and go. We've flown 12 plus hours on some vehicles. So really, I think it's more of a mindset like, hey, I know this system can work. Got rid of 5 pounds or 6 pounds of battery, increase the payload of the vehicle. So all this kind of stuff. And they're just like, hey, we're going to operate this thing professionally. It's going to be like a mini flight department. We're going to keep records, there's checklists, there's logbooks, there's requirements. So when somebody comes in the lab, hey, we want to fly this. Okay, well, here's the list of stuff that you got to do before I'll let you fly your thing on my airplane.
Show me you're ready.
Yeah, exactly. Don't waste my time. I'm not going to waste your time, and we'll both be happy because the thing will work at the end.
Yeah. Exactly.
So
all right, folks, we're going to close out here with our workbench, and that'll end part 1 of our conversation with Red Jensen. And next week, we will continue on with part 2, where we talk about the Prandlt-D wing, the Prandlt-M wing, NASA interns, Armstrong Research Center projects, a little bit about the Reno Air Racers that he's involved in, as well as our famed lightning round. And then, of course, Joe and I will spend a brief minute next time talking about what we've done the last week and projects we're continuing to build as usual. So tune in next week for part 2. We look forward to seeing you there.
Well, let's take a second to talk about our workbenches, what we got, and then we'll work on getting out of here.
Yep.
I know we got the build night coming up Friday, so main thing on mine, I want to get the Corsair finished up. Like I guess put that front burner high priority. I've been working on it long enough. I need to finish it up. Red, do you have anything exciting on your workbench right now?
I actually do not. I just finished that little foamy thing I was talking about. Let me see if I can see it up there.
Oh, look at that. That's almost looks like a little goblin almost. Like a Strix goblin, I think is what the one with the blue stickers on it, right? Or are you talking about the biplane up there?
The one with the blue stickers on it, that's scaled composites, Burt Rutan's deal. have some friends that work over there, and they do every other Friday races, and they decided that that's their one design racer for this year. So I haven't flown it yet. I
Okay.
put it together the other day, but I haven't flown it yet.
Okay, so you were talking about the biplane up there then.
Yeah, that's the last thing that I built. My son and I are restoring a mid-'60s muscle car, so that's kind of been taking up a good chunk of my time lately.
That's right.
But I have, if I never bought another airplane, I have enough airplanes to build to last probably the rest of my life. I have a massive stash of just stuff.
Yeah. Have you ever gone to one of those estate sales and you walk in and you're like, he doesn't just have a couple planes for sale. He's got the entire hobby store.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a huge kit fan. And lately I've been going back and buying things that I couldn't afford when I was a kid. Some of the higher end stuff, like I'm collecting some motors. I fully intend to fly them. They're not just shelf queens. My friends kid me about that all the time, but I fully intend to fly some of these relatively rare things that I have.
Okay.
Hey, you're in a position to do it now.
Exactly right.
Right? Can't take it with me.
That's right.
That's it. Well, you can pass it on to your kids if they fly it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. J1000 is what I'm going to be doing when I get my chance this Friday.
What's that?
It's Junker. It's a concept wing from the 1930s done by Mr. Junker. And it's basically this massive, probably about 40-seat flying wing with these.
Is that the one that has like the weird landing gear with a bunch of wheels on the bottom, and like I don't know. Looks like it was corrugated metal built out of something like that.
That's Kalinin K12, the one that looks like it's got a giant cannon on the front of it. At least that was originally designed with about 8 motors. That's a different animal. This is looks like 2 Aladdin shoes with a flying elevator in the front, and it's just a long wing with drag rudders on the outside.
Got it. Yep, I know that. I know the one. Awesome.
Yeah, it's ridiculous looking, and I can't wait to finish it up. I'm trying to think if I have one of the, I'll call it the shoes on hand, but it looks like I buried it. Anyway, that and the Texan, I think, is probably what I'm gonna roll and see what I can put together. Those are probably the 2 on the top of my list. I could be working for days on planes.
You normally are.
I usually am, yeah. I don't want to go in the other room. There's like 50 planes on a rack, and there's another rack upstairs. It's like I really need to sift through them and start good. And that was my plan: is fly. This is for Red's benefit, not our listeners. Is to fly them, and when they crash, just take all the stuff out and get rid of the plane. If I want it again, I have plans. I'll fly it again.
Got to purge, man. You got to purge.
I really do. It's bad. But that's right. It. Those are the things I'm going to tackle. So, good.
All right. Well, I don't have anything else. Matthew, do you?
The only thing I have is to thank Red so much for his time today. I know you devoted so much time to us, to talking to us today, and I seriously, we could talk for another like 4 or 5 hours about all the things we talked about and most of the things we didn't get to. But I guess we'll have to wait for another day.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And, at some point in the future, if the time's right and you'd like some content, feel free to reach out.
Sure.
I'm going to plug my YouTube channel real quick, if I may.
Oh, please. Absolutely.
It's Red Jensen, and I do a horrible job at it. My son is really the one pushing me to do more content. And, right now we're doing this car thing. So we've done a few videos with that. And, and I'm over the editing hump. I mean, it's horrible, but I know how to do it at least. And, but, so there's a lot of airplane content there too. I'll film something for 30 seconds or whatever and put that up there, but there'll be more stuff in the future. Yep. And there's some Prandtl stuff up there, and there's all kinds of stuff. So feel free to check it out, and you can share my email address if people have questions or they want to get in contact or whatever.
Well, what would that be?
Happy to chat. It's redthealien@gmail.com.
Okay, good.
So the little company thing I do for my kids, I call it Alien Technologies. So I'm apparently the head alien.
There you go.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again for hanging with us and giving us your time. I know this was longer than we initially projected, but it's been a pleasure speaking with you, learning from you, and hopefully it's been just an enjoyable experience for you as well.
Yeah, same here.
Well, I've enjoyed it as well. So thank you again for having me. And sorry to keep you guys up so late.
No,
that's okay. I'll survive. It's only work tomorrow. We'll be all right.
Right.
All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get on out of here, guys. As always, thanks for tuning in and listening. As always, if you want to reach out to us, you can get us at theaviationrcnoob@gmail.com. You can message Matthew at aviationrcnoob.com or Joe at aviationrcnoob to get me. And as always, thank you, and we will see y'all next time.
All right, see you next time. Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks again, Red.
No worries.